अस्सलाम वालेकुम एवरीवन, क्या हाल चाल हैं आप लोगों के। वालेकुम अस्सलाम, वालेकुम अस्सलाम। सो कैसा फील कर रहे हैं आप लोग? आई एम गुड अल्हम्दुलिल्लाह। Where to find P13? P13 is I think क्रैक के लेवल्स पे मिल जाएगा। सर आपकी बहुत याद आ रही है, बट आई एम राइट हियर। सर आज 10 बजे, हाँ बिल्कुल इंशाल्लाह। आई एम नॉट गोना स्ट्रीम एनी लेटर देन 10:30, सो 10:30 के बाद you guys should 11 you guys should be in bed. Sir, if you need water, let us know. Bangladeshi. नहीं, I have my water here. Okay, I'm sorted. अच्छा सर आपको जो फील कर रहे हैं उसका ऑपोजिट। ऐसी बात नहीं है, आप लोगों को लगता होगा सिर्फ आप लोग नर्वस हो रहे हैं। दैट्स नॉट द केस। नर्वस हर कोई होता है। आई एम ऑल्सो नर्वस फॉर यू गाइज ऑब्वियसली। I just want to make sure that you guys, I just want to make sure कि आप लोग, as a teacher, I do the best that I can, and I don't end up not covering something. So that's something that every teacher who's invested goes through. So again, please do rate of change, please, or how to manage time. Big fan, sir. Please save my life. Sir, paper 13 was easy. Do you think 12 will be difficult? Okay, it shouldn't matter, honestly. I mean, it doesn't matter what I think or what anyone thinks. जब पेपर सामने आएगा, then पता चल जाएगा. I mean, I'm not saying पता चल जाएगा आप लोगों का, but what I mean is कि you'll find out, basically. Okay? When the paper is in front of you, you'll find out. Simple as that. How long will the stream last? Probably till 10:30. So let's start now. Let's not waste any more time. And also, before I start, I would really appreciate if you guys like the channel. And also, sorry, not like the channel. Ulta bol diya. See, exams kareeb aa rahe na. I'm also getting nervous. Like the stream and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that yet. So please, thoda detail mein karwana. Dekhiye, I'm gonna try and do it in as much detail as possible. Okay, so I'm gonna take you guys through all the notes. Okay, and we're gonna discuss every single concept there is. And if there are some questions, we're gonna solve that question also. Okay? Okay, so let's start with the very first concept, which is basically simultaneous equations. Okay? Ab dekho. Simultaneous equations is something that we're all familiar with. Okay? It's we solve simultaneous equation for what? So we solve simultaneous equation to find out the point of intersection. It could be between two lines that are linear. It could be between two lines that are not linear. Okay, but the main purpose of solving two equations simultaneously is so that we get the point of intersection. Simple as that. Okay, now when you're solving two linear equations, the methods that you can use are elimination, substitution. When you're solving, it's best that you use elimination, especially when you have two linear equations, because the amount of space that you're given, this is just revision. Okay, this is just revision. Okay, because the amount of space that you're given is only enough for you to do substitution, is not it's not enough for substitution. Okay, so my advice to you is, when will this happen? This will happen in equation of circles. This is likely to happen in maybe differentiation, where you have found out the equations of two lines and you're supposed to find out the point of intersection. So in that case, it's best that you solve two equations simultaneously. Acha, also, I don't know, I mean, I hope you guys are aware, but there is a way to check your answer. So hum ek kaam karte hain, simultaneously, let's also discuss all the things that you can check in your calculator. Okay, so there's a way to check your answer also. Let's do that. So here we are. Okay, now, so what you do is you go on to menu. Okay, you scroll down to equation /function. Okay, now what is it that you want to check? You want to check, what is it that you want to do? You want to solve simultaneous equations, so you press 1. Now how many unknowns do you have? You have 2 unknowns. Okay, type the equations exactly how you see them. So 7 is the coefficient of x, 6 is the coefficient of y, 17 is the constant. Okay, then for the next equation, x is the coefficient of, 3 is the coefficient of x, 4 is the coefficient of y, and 3 is the constant. So you type that, press the equals to sign, and you press the equals to sign. So wait for the magic, x equals to 5 and y is equals to -3. But remember, you have to show your working. Okay, you have to show your working. If you don't show your working, you will not get full marks. Okay, it's really as simple as that. Then you have linear and non-linear. This can only be done by substitution. Remember that when you substitute, you're likely to end up with a quadratic equation, which you can also solve using your calculator. Okay, so for example, here's a linear equation. You plug this into the quadratic equation. Then you expand, you simplify. So by the way, all these notes are available on my channel, on my website, mathletebysart.com. Okay, so you can get it from there. I can't tell you exactly for your version of the calculator, but I will tell you this, that what you can do is, if you don't know how to do a certain concept in a calculator, then just write down they're available for free. Okay, just write down the name of the calculator, write down the function. Okay, find a YouTube video on it. You don't necessarily have to watch my video, just watch the video, learn the concept. That's all that matters. Okay. So once you've made, now in substitution, what we do is we make any one variable the subject. So we've made x the subject, we plug it back into the equation, we expand, we simplify, and this is the quadratic equation that we've ended up with. And we are going to check the answer of this as well. Okay, so you go into equation, you go into polynomial. What is the degree of the polynomial? It's a second degree polynomial. Now, we are now going to type the coefficients. So 12 is the coefficient of x squared, although it's y squared, but doesn't matter. Calculator ko to nahi pata na. Minus 44 is the coefficient of x, 32 is the constant. Press the equals to sign. So you get one value of y. Once again, you're supposed to show the working. One value of y is 8/3. The other value of y is, press the equals to sign again. You get the other value of y, which is equal to 1. Now, the good thing of this calculator is that it not only gives you the solution, but it also gives you the turning point. So the minimum value, because it's a minimum curve, if you look at this, you know that this is a minimum curve. The minimum value is 11/6, okay? And it gives you the x value, and then it gives, press the equals to sign again, so it gives you the y value also. The y value is minus 25/3. So that means you now have the coordinates of the turning point of this curve as well, even though you're not supposed to do that, but you have them, okay? So that's all there is as far as simultaneous equations is concerned. It's just a prerequisite. It's not an official topic. So now let's move on to quadratic equations. Now, quadratic is one of the very easy topics of AS. It's basically something that you should look forward to. It's even the most difficult concepts are easy. Although if you guys look at yesterday's stream, the mock that I solved, that was an important question, the very first question. So make sure that you watch that if you haven't seen it. So what are the concepts? The concepts are completing squares, sketching a quadratic curve, discriminant applied to a curve, quadratic inequalities, discriminant applied to a curve in a straight line, and disguised quadratics. Okay, so these are all the concepts that we have in this chapter. Now, let's see. So how do you sketch a quadratic curve? What is it that you need? You need the x-intercepts, you need the y-intercept, and you need the turning point, and also you need to know what nature it is. Okay, so a curve could be like this, or a curve could be like this. अच्छा, इसको फिलहाल hide कर देते हैं. A quadratic curve, remember, may or may not have x-intercepts, meaning that it's possible that your quadratic curve is entirely above the x-axis like here, so no point in finding x-intercepts, or it's entirely below the x-axis like this, no point in finding the x-intercepts. Now the question is, how do you determine the nature? How do you decide whether a quadratic curve is going to be like this or whether it's going to be like this? Very simple. You look for the coefficient of x squared. If the coefficient of x squared is greater than 0, that means it's going to be a minimum curve. If the coefficient of x squared is less than 0, that means it's going to be a maximum curve. Simple. Okay, then the turning point. How do you find out the turning point? You find out the turning point by bringing it from the general form to the completed square form. Okay, so from the general form to the completed square form, how do you do that? There are multiple ways. One is that you can use identities. Okay, so when you're using identities, you expand the completed square version, which may be given to you in the question, or which may be something that you have to figure out, or maybe you can use the general form, which is ax minus h the whole thing square plus k. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा. Now, once you do that, you compare, okay, you compare the coefficients. So you expand this. The coefficient of x squared is a on the right hand side, it's a on the left hand side. The coefficient of x is minus 2h on the left, it's 6 on the right, okay? But this is not a very efficient way of bringing it into completed square form. The way that I prefer is the method that you use in O levels, okay? So that is, you basically leave a bit of space. I think मैंने यहाँ पे कहीं पे कराया हुआ भी है. Let me see if I've done it. No, I think I haven't done it. But here anyway. So to bring it in completed square form, I'll do an example. So suppose you have y is equals to x squared plus 6x plus 8. So what you do is you basically leave a bit of space, then you write 8. So this is something that we need in equation of circles, something that we need in quadratics. So I need to add the square of something in order to bring it in completed square form, and I need to subtract the square of the exact same thing. So I will add the square of 3, and I will also subtract the square of 3. So this part of the expression becomes x plus 3, the whole thing squared. This part of the expression becomes 8 minus 9, which is minus 1. So you have x plus 3, the whole thing squared minus 1, and there you go. That's the answer, okay? Now you can, I have a dedicated video on this which you can watch. Right now we're just doing a run through of it. Okay, now once you do bring it in completed square form, remember how do you find out the turning point? So whatever is inside the bracket, think of it this way. Whatever is inside the bracket, you set that equal to 0 for a second. You find out the value of x, so that's minus 3. And whatever is outside the bracket, that you take as it is. So that's basically the coordinates. These are basically the coordinates of the turning point. Why do we need the turning point? Because we have to make a sketch. Okay, now, moving on. Express 2x squared, so this is a past paper question. Express 2x squared minus 8x plus 10 in the form. Now you can do this using the method that we do in normal math, or you can do this using by comparing. Okay, so you expand ax plus b, the whole thing squared. This is what you get. Okay, remember to use the second identity to do this. Then ax squared plus 2abx plus ab squared plus c. So this is just another way to do it. It's really up to you how you do it. But once you turned it into completing square form, notice that the question is asking you to state the least value of y. Least value of y is basically the y coordinate of the turning point. Okay, so let's go back. The y coordinate of the turning point is basically the minimum point, okay, also known as the stationary point, if it's a minimum curve. If it's a maximum curve, the y coordinate of the turning point is the maximum point. And we're talking strictly about quadratic curves over here. Okay, now, so that is basically how you sketch a quadratic curve. Now, what's the purpose of sketching a quadratic curve? The purpose of sketching a quadratic curve is so that we can find out the domain and range. When we get to functions, you will see the purpose of it. And mainly it's basically to find out the domain and range, unless of course you're categorically asked to make a rough sketch, then obviously you have to sketch it. Okay, so here for example, once you bring it in completed square form, then the question is asking you to find the coordinates of the stationary point. Stationary point, remember, is basically the same as the turning point, or it could be maximum or the minimum point, depending on the nature. Okay? All right, now, then you find the intercepts. How do you find out the intercepts of a quadratic equation? If you want the x-intercepts, you plug in y equals to 0 and then you solve. If you want the y-intercept, you plug in x equals to 0 and then you solve. Okay, or you can simply eyeball it from the equation that the y-intercept is basically the constant that you have. Okay, and then as far as the x-intercepts are concerned, when you plug in y equals to 0, you have three options. One is factorization, the other is quadratic formula, then there is completing square. Now, factorization and quadratic formula are perhaps the two most commonly used methods to solve a quadratic equation. But remember, whatever it is that you use your calculator to check your answer, but also remember to show you're working. Okay? All right, so moving on. Achha, now let's talk about quadratic inequalities. Okay? Achha, I'll enable the chat. But please chat when I don't want you guys discussing about leaks and all that stuff. If you do that, then I'll just disable it once again. Okay? So I don't want this stream to be a source of you guys finding the leaked paper or something like that. Okay? So please, no irrelevant stuff. Okay, now quadratic inequalities are very, very important. Why? Because quadratic inequalities are used in discriminant. Now, when I was doing the mock and I was solving discriminant related questions, you guys, for some reason, not all of you obviously, but some of you were saying, okay, when I solved a quadratic inequality, you guys were completely unaware as to what it is that I am doing. Okay? So this quadratic inequality we use in order to find out is something that we might have to use in discriminant, because when we apply the discriminant, chances are that you may end up with a quadratic inequality. Okay, now, so what do you suggest we should depend in the formula? No, but a formula sheet is just as backup. If for some reason you're unable to recall what the formula is, then refer to the formula sheet. It's not a game changer. It's ये नहीं कि वो formula sheet मिल गई, मुझे ये करने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. Okay, formula sheet is just a backup. That's it. Okay, now suppose that you have a quadratic inequality like this. Now pay close attention. Now greater than 0 means, now remember, since it's a quadratic inequality, that means this will give us a quadratic curve. So because this is a quadratic inequality, that means y is greater than 0. How do I know y is greater than 0? This is basically y, which is greater than 0. Greater than 0 means I want the range of x where y is greater than 0, or the range of x where the curve is above the x-axis. Okay, we want to write down the range of x for which the curve is above the x-axis. Achha. The best way to solve a quadratic inequality is by making a rough sketch. Okay, please don't try to do it directly. The best way to solve it is by making a rough sketch. If you do it directly, there's no guarantee whether or not you'll be able to do it correctly or not. So I'll do an example. Suppose you have x squared plus x minus 12 is greater than 0. Okay, so this is an example. Pay close attention. Now you will do middle term breaking. Now forget for a second that this is quadratic inequality. So you'll do x squared plus 4x minus 3x, and then you will write minus 12 as it is greater than 0. Now in the first two terms you will take x common, so that's x plus 4. Then the next two terms you will take minus 3 common, so that's also x plus 4 greater than 0. Okay, so now we have x minus 3, x plus 4 greater than 0. Please do not make the mistake that you solve it like you're solving a quadratic equation, that x plus 3 is greater than 4 and x plus 3 is greater than 0 and x plus 4 is greater than 0. And you say that x is greater than 3 and then you say x is greater than minus 4. Okay? This is wrong on so many levels, and students who do this are basically not using their brain. Why? Because you're just contradicting yourself. आप एक तरफ बोल रहे हैं कि भाई x 3 से बड़ा है, and then you're saying that x is greater than minus 4. Okay, so this is absolutely wrong. ठीक है, I cannot emphasize on how wrong this is. ठीक है, यहाँ तक सही है, but after that it's wrong. So the question is, what do we do? Well, here's the correct way to do it. Pay close attention. So once you've done it till here, for a minute, assume that this is a quadratic equation. Okay, if it was a quadratic equation, so that means x minus 3 is equals to 0, or x plus 4 is equals to 0, which means x equals to 3 or x is equals to minus 4. But obviously we're not going to leave it over here because we're solving not a quadratic equation, we're solving a quadratic inequality. So quickly make a rough sketch, okay, keeping in mind the x-intercepts. That's it. That's all you have to take care of. So the x-intercepts are 3 and minus 4. Now what do you want? You want the range of x for which the curve is above the x-axis. How do I know above the x-axis? Because the question is greater than 0. So we want the range of x for which the curve is above the x-axis. So let's highlight that. That's this part of the curve and this part of the curve. Now what's the range for these parts of the curve? For this one, since it's on the left side of minus 4, we will say x is less than minus 4. Okay. Or we say x is greater than 3. Why? Because this part of the curve is on the right side, so that means all x values are greater than 3. By which step? You can do it towards the end. Okay, towards the end you can do that. ठीक हो गया? So this is the correct way to do it. And if this was, let's say, less than 0, let's do an example of less than 0. Suppose you have x squared plus 2x minus 8 is less than 0. So here's what you're going to do. You have x squared plus 4x minus 2x minus 8 less than 0. Solve it like you would solve a quadratic equation. Take minus 2 common, x minus 4 less than 0. So that means x minus 2, x plus 4 less than 0. For a minute, assume that this is a quadratic equation. So x equals to 2 or x equals to minus 4. Now quickly make a rough sketch, keeping in mind only the x-intercepts. That's all you have to be careful of. So the x-intercepts are minus 4 and 2. What part of the curve do you want? You want the part of the curve that's below the x-axis. How do I know that? By looking at the inequality sign. Okay, below the x-axis. So if it's below the x-axis, that means we're talking about this part of the curve. Now, what's the range of x, which gives us the part of the curve that's below the x-axis? That is basically x greater than minus 4 less than 2. Okay, there you go. Acha. Also, let's use our calculator to check the answer. Okay, let's use a calculator to check the answer. Your calculator, I don't know if you're aware, but your calculator can also solve quadratic inequalities. Okay, so let's learn how to do that. Go on to menu, go on to inequality, select second degree. ठीक है, मैं दोबारा बताता हूँ. So go on to menu. Okay, scroll down to inequality. ठीक है. So press equals to sign to enter this mode. Now, what kind of polynomial is it? It's a second degree polynomial. So you type that. Now, what's the kind of inequality that we're solving? We're solving the one where it's greater than 0. So that's at number 1. So we'll select number 1. Now you type the coefficients. The coefficients are 1. And the coefficient of x is also 1. The constant is minus 12. There you go. What do we get? We get x to be less than minus 4. You can see that. X is in fact less than minus 4. And then you get x to be greater than 3. Or 3 is less than x, same thing. X is greater than 3, 3 is less than x. It's the same thing. Okay, now if your calculator can do this, that's great. If your calculator cannot do this, then nothing to worry about. It's okay. Okay, no problem. All right. Now, you can check the answer for this also. Let's do that. So this is also an inequality. It's a second degree inequality, but this is less than 0. So you'll select number 2, type the coefficients. 1 is the coefficient of x squared. 2 is the coefficient of x. Minus 8 is the constant. And there you go. You have x is greater than minus 4 less than 2. That's exactly what you have over here. Okay. There you go. All right. Now let's move on to discriminant. Okay. Now, a quadratic curve can basically interact with the x-axis 3 different ways. One is that it cuts it twice. Okay. The other is that the curve is tangent to the x-axis. And then the third is that it doesn't intersect the x-axis at all. Okay. Could be entirely above the x-axis, could be entirely below the x-axis. When it cuts it twice, we say that the curve has real and distinct roots, or we say that the curve cuts the x-axis at 2 points. In this case, the discriminant is greater than 0. Okay, so if the discriminant is greater than 0, that means a quadratic curve could be minimum, could be maximum, has real and distinct roots. There will be 2 values of x, and the curve cuts the x-axis twice. Okay. Now, so if the discriminant, like for example here, I've done an example where the discriminant is equal to 0. If the discriminant is equal to 0, that means you have real and equal roots, or we can say that the curve is tangent to the x-axis, or we can say that there are repeating roots, meaning that the 2 roots that you will get are real and they're equal and they are repeating as well. Okay? If, however, the discriminant is less than 0, like for example here it's minus 3. So what can the curve look like? The curve will be entirely above the x-axis. Acha. How do we write this? We say no real roots. Okay, we can say imaginary roots. We can say that the curve lies below or above the x-axis, or we can say that it's always positive or always negative. Okay, so it can always be positive or it can always be negative. That is what we can say. Okay. All right. Now, so in short, also if the question says real roots, okay, real roots, or if let's say the question says meets the x-axis, real roots, or for example, if the question says that it meets the x-axis, in that case, the discriminant will be greater than or equal to 0. When does the inequality sign flip? The inequality sign flips when you multiply the entire expression, but when you multiply both sides by minus. That is when the inequality sign flips. Okay. So for example, Here's a question. We're supposed to show that the whole of the curve lies above the x-axis. Now, there are two ways to show it. One is that you can show it with the help of discriminant, that the discriminant is less than 0, which means this is what the curve probably looks like. The other is that you can actually find out the coordinates of the turning point of this curve, and you can show that the turning point of this curve is above the x-axis. So that is why the entire curve basically lies above the x-axis. Okay? Achha. Then there is discriminant applied to a curve in a straight line. So if a straight line is cutting the x-axis at 2 points, that means the discriminant is greater than 0. The line and the curve will intersect at 2 points, and there will be two solutions. If the curve is tangent to the line or the line is tangent to the curve, in that case, the discriminant will be equal to 0. We will say that the line is tangent. Achha, it's not to the x-axis. The line is tangent to the curve. And the number of solutions is basically 1. There's just one solution. Okay. Now, अच्छा मैंने उसको remove कर दिया है. ठीक है. Okay, I think you're right. I should turn off the chat for a while. ये जो लोग लीक की बात कर रहे हैं ना, सबसे ज़्यादा ज़िंदगी आपकी ही अजीरन होगी अगर लीक हो गया. अभी जो students A2 में है ना, they're still traumatized. Okay, they're still paying the price of the paper leak. Why? Because God forbid if the paper does get leaked. What do you think? You think everyone will solve the paper? One issue would be that the threshold will go high if, God forbid, it does get leaked. The other issue would be that Cambridge will find out. And if they find out, that means you will get your grade on the basis of either M1 or S1. Okay, and I don't know what you guys are like in M1, S1, but when they did that last year, a lot of students suffered. That means you will then have to give it in October, November. And if you have to give it in October, November, that means your A2 will get compromised because you'll be studying for AS. And by the time you're done with AS, P3 would probably be finished, or maybe the last couple of chapters would be left. So the thing is, you're not just going to pay the price once, you'll pay the price multiple times. So stop. The worst thing that can happen to you guys right now, honestly, at this point, is that the paper gets cancelled, God forbid, or is that the paper gets leaked. Okay, and you're going to suffer, honestly. Because का जो fallback आएगा ना, वो फिर आप भरते ही रहेंगे. आपके पहली बात आपके grades irrelevant हो जाएंगे, ठीक है. आपके A2 compromise होगा. फिर जब आप, there is no guarantee कि आप what kind of the paper they will give you in October, November, okay? And I mean, you ask any A2 student right now, okay? Ask any A2 student how they felt when the paper was leaked and how they felt when they realized that the paper has basically been, like the paper has been cancelled in the sense that no matter how well you did in the paper, it's just irrelevant. And they were given the grade on the basis of their performance in P1, in M1 and S1. Okay, so they all suffered. In short, they all suffered. You guys can ask your seniors and let me know what they say. Okay, so if the question says that the line meets the curve, that means the discriminant will be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so for example, here's the past paper question. It says determine the set of values of the constant k for which the line does not intersect. Okay, so step 1, that you will substitute the two equations. So we've done that. Y equals to 4x square plus k, y equals to x square. Okay. And then step 2, you get all the terms to the left-hand side. You make a quadratic equation out of it. You bring it in this form. Step 3, because it says does not intersect, that means discriminant b square minus 4ac will be less than 0. So you do that. B square minus 4ac is less than 0. So you get k is less than minus 4. Also learn to pick hints from the question. If the question says set of values, range of values, that means you're likely to end up with a inequality. Okay. Now let's do another question. The question says find the set of values of k for which the line intersects the curve at two distinct points. So two distinct points means that the discriminant will be greater than 0. So first of all, you substitute the two. You make a quadratic equation out of it. You have the coefficient of x squared, that's 1. But since x is in multiple places, you take x along with the minus sign common. So you have 2 plus k, that's the coefficient of x. And this is c, the constant. Achha, remember the rule that even though b is minus 2 plus k, but this minus really doesn't mean anything because when we square it, ultimately it becomes positive. I think we did a question like this in the mock also. So 2 plus k, the whole thing square, minus 4 times 4, this is what you get. And now you've ended up with a quadratic inequality. So the way to solve a quadratic inequality remains the same as what we saw earlier. So you will solve it like a quadratic equation. You will find out the two values of x, not the values of x in this case k. You will make a quadratic curve. Achha, why are we making a minimum curve? That because the coefficient of k squared is positive. Keeping in mind the x-intercepts. Now, what is the range of k that you want? Because it's greater than 0, that means we want the range of k for which the curve is above the x-axis. So that means we should be on the left-hand side of -6. So k is less than -6, and we should be on the right-hand side of 2. So that means k is greater than 2. Once again, use your calculator to check your answer. Achha, do show middle term breaking. I've skipped that part. Okay, but you have to show it. These are my class notes. So I probably skipped it to save time. So this will be k squared plus 6k minus 2k minus 12. Okay, so what you did for x earlier, now you're doing for k. Also, I don't know what this is, probably a different question. चलिए ये देख लेते हैं. A line has equation y is equals to 3x plus k, and a curve has equation y equals to x squared plus kx plus 6, where k is a constant. Find the set of values of k for which the line and the curve have two distinct points of intersection. So once again, you will equate the two. You will get all the terms on the left-hand side. You will make a quadratic inequality out of it. Why quadratic inequality? 2 points of intersection means b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0. Solve it like you would solve a quadratic equation. Show your working. And then what part of the curve do you want? You want the part of the curve that's above the x-axis, above the horizontal axis. Why? Because you're solving for greater than 0. Once again, use your calculator to check your answer, but show all your working. Achha, lastly, we come to disguised quadratics. Now, disguised quadratics can be something like this, can happen in trigonometric equations also. So that is when you have an equation which, although is not a quadratic equation, but can be turned into a quadratic equation. Now, the only thing to watch out for that is the substitution part. So if you're substituting something, make sure that you mention it clearly. So here, for example, I can see that one power is double of the other, and there's a constant, and that is something that happens in a quadratic equation, that the greater power is double of the other, and you have a constant. So once we take x squared as a, x power 4 becomes a squared, and then this is what the equation turns into. Solve it like you would solve any other quadratic equation, but remember, you have basically solved for a, not for x. So a is equals to x squared. You take the square root on both sides, you get plus minus 2. Here also you take the square root on both sides, you get plus minus 2. So in something like this also, you can substitute root x to be something else. We've taken it as a, which means x becomes a squared, and then you can solve like you would solve any other quadratic equation. Okay? And then remember to substitute it and then solve. Okay. अच्छा, यहाँ पे एक चीज़ का आप लोगों ने ख्याल रखना है. That when you substitute and you solve this, okay, when you take a to be equal to root x, so this becomes a square minus 4a minus 12. And when you solve it, चलो मैं इसको ना दोबारा solve कर देता हूँ, because here it's a little messy. You guys may not be able to figure it out. I'll solve it here. So basically, let root x be equal to a. Okay, so if root x is equals to a, so that means a square minus 4a minus 12 is equals to 0. So a square minus 6a plus 2a, we're doing middle term breaking over here, minus 12 is equal to 0. Take a common, so you have a minus 6. Take 2 common, you have a minus 6 equals to 0. Okay, so you have a plus 2 into a minus 6, which is equal to 0. So that means a equals minus 2 or a equals to 6. Now, when you go back to the substitution, so this means root x is equals to minus 2 or root x is equals to 6. Now, root x equals to 6 makes sense. We can square both sides and we can find out the value of x, which is equal to 36. But it's not possible for a square root. Also, this is not plus minus. Keep that in mind. Because there is nothing outside the square root, that means it's understood that it's plus. So it's not possible for a positive square root to give you a negative value, so we don't solve this. We say not possible. Okay, don't square both sides and think that, okay, x is equals to 4. That's incorrect. This means that the positive square root of x is minus 2, which obviously doesn't make sense. Okay, so that's why we say not possible. Okay, so something that you guys should watch out for, that if you know that the square root is positive, then the answer can only be positive. It cannot turn out to be negative. Okay, so that's it as far as quadratics is concerned. I've done a stream on it also. You guys can check it out. But I hope you guys are not in a state where you have to, where you don't know a thing or two about quadratics. I'm sure concept तो सबको आता ही होगा. अच्छा, अब आते हैं binomial पे. So binomial, basically binomial theorem or binomial expansion is also another very easy chapter. And there are like 3-4 concepts that you have. And even the most difficult concepts of binomial are easy. Okay, so first of all, remember that the total number of terms will always be 1 greater than the power. So for example, if it's whole square, you will have 3 terms. If it's whole cube, you will have a total of 4 terms. If it's power 4, you will have a total of 5 terms. Okay? Okay. Now how do you expand? This is the formula that we use. NCR, a raised to the power n minus r, b to the power r. N basically starts from the power, and then r starts from 0, and we gradually start increasing it. Now when doing binomial expansion, if it's possible to do it vertically, I would strongly advise you to do it vertically. Okay, and then in the end you can write your answer horizontally. ठीक है, so जो main इसमें concepts होते हैं ना, वो होते हैं basically finding the coefficient of x. So when x is in the second term, like for example here, and the question says that find out a certain coefficient of x. Okay, like for example, coefficient of x squared, coefficient of x cubed, coefficient of x power 4. So the rule is that when x is in the second term, the value of r is equal to the required power of x. So for example, if you want x cubed, the value of r is equals to 3. If you want x power 4, the value of r is equals to 4. So that means if, let's say, you're given something like this, so you don't have to waste your time expanding this entirely. And if you want the coefficient of x power 10, simply take r as 10. And when you take r as 10, you should get the coefficient of x power 10. If you want the coefficient of x power 8, take r as 8, and you will get the coefficient of x power 8. ठीक है? अच्छा. So like for example here, this is a past paper question. It says the coefficient of x power 1 and the coefficient of x squared are equal. So to get the coefficient of x power 1, because x is in the second term, we will take r as 1. So this is what you get. And to get the coefficient of x squared, we take r as 2. This is the coefficient. Achha, also remember, if the question is asking you to just write down the coefficient, that means you will just write the coefficient, okay, not with x. Okay. Then after that, also, notice in this question it says find the value of the non-zero constant a. So this should get your attention. Non-zero constant of a basically means that the value of a that's not equal to 0, which means that there's got to be a value of a which is equal to 0. When we're solving this, there's got to be a value of a which is equal to 0, and that will tell you whether you've solved it correctly or not. So this is the equation that we get. And once we move all the terms to one side, this is what we get. And once we take a common, then you can see that a is either equal to 0, which is obviously not the value that we want, or this is equal to 0, which gives us another value of a, and that's the value that we want. Okay, so learn to take hints from the question. If the question says find the positive constant, find the negative constant, non-zero, that means it's likely that you're going to end up with more than one, and you're supposed to give the one that the question says. Then another example, the coefficient of x squared and x cubed. So if you want the coefficient of x squared, take r as 2. If you want the coefficient of x cubed, take r as 3. And then in the end, you're supposed to find a upon b. So simply divide the two, you'll have the answer. Okay, when x is in the first term, so if x is in the first term, the value of r is found by using the formula n minus the required power of x. Now what does that mean? I'll explain. So for example, here, if you want the coefficient of x cubed, so what's n? N is 4. What's the required power of x? 3. So that means the value of r that you will use is 4 minus 3. N minus the required power of x. Okay, so that's 1. That means using 1 as the value of r will get you your desired coefficient. That's the coefficient of x cubed. Okay, that's how it works basically. Not something that's tested very often. And also remember, binomial is a topic in which you can always use your common sense. Okay, you don't have to sit down and memorize these rules. You can ultimately use your common sense, and at some point you will have to. So now this is the trickiest part. That is when x is in both terms. When x is in both terms, here's what we do. So मैं इसका past paper question solve कर देता हूँ आप लोगों के लिए. When x is in both terms. Yeah. So for example, this question. So this question says find the term that's independent of x. अच्छा, independent of x का मतलब क्या होता है? Independent of x means x power 0. Independent of x means x to the power of 0. Okay, so you know what the value, you need to know what the value of r is. So 6cr, 3x raised to the power 6 minus r, 2 upon x squared raised to the power of r. Okay, now you will ignore every term that does not have anything to do with x. Okay, so what do we have? We have x raised to the power 6 minus r into x raised to the power minus 2 using the rule of indices. I've shifted this in the numerator, and we want this to give us x power 0. So x raised to the power 6 minus r, same basis multiply हो रही हैं, powers add हो जाएंगी, ultimately subtract हो रही हैं, that's not our problem, equals to 0. So x and x we ignore. So 6 minus 3r is equals to 0. That means 3r is equals to 6. So r is equals to 2. So this is the value of r that we want that will give us the term that's independent of x. अच्छा, also अभी जो Chinese paper आया था, I don't know if you guys are aware, but उसमें एक binomial का concept आया था. मैं आप लोगों को वो करा देता हूँ, क्योंकि that's something that's not tested very often. Who knows, हमारे paper में भी आ जाए. So just a minute, let me find that paper. ठीक है, I've enabled the chat. Remember what I said about discussing leaks and stuff like that? It's irrelevant. Indian paper? जो भी था, Indian था, Chinese था, doesn't matter. Paper तो था ना. Just a minute, मुझे वो paper मिल नहीं रहा है. I hope I can find it. Yeah, we're going to cover Trig as well. Yeah, I found the paper, but I can't seem to find that question. Just a minute. Tell what I'll do is I'll open up a question similar to that, because इस तरह के questions जो हैं वो add maths में भी आते हैं. Just a minute. That was not. That was P13. So that was P13. Okay, Taro, let me check. Oh yeah, you're right. That was P13. Okay, so basically there was this question. Now pay attention. There was this question where it said that this is 2 minus 3 upon 2x. 2 minus 3 upon 2x, the whole thing raised to the power of 5. Okay? And you had to find out the first three terms. Okay? So we all can do that. We all can find out the first three terms. So that would be 5c0, 2 raised to the power of 5, minus 3 upon 2x raised to the power of 0. Then you have 5c1, 2 raised to the power of 4, minus 3 upon 2x raised to the power of 1. Then you have 5c2, 2 raised to the power of 3, minus 3 upon 2x raised to the power of 5 minus 2. Okay, so this will give you the first three terms. पहली term जो है वो 32 आ जाएगी. दूसरी term जो है that's going to be, okay, let me work this out. So 5c1 into 2 power 4 into 2 power 4 into minus 3 divided by 2. So that's minus 120 along with x. And then 5c3 into 8 into 9 divided by 4, so that's 180 x squared. Okay, So that means 32 minus 120x plus 180x squared. Now, so far so good, nothing new so far. But then after that, there was something that, although it's pretty simple, but it's not something that's tested very often. So I thought I'll make you guys do it. And then it says, use your answer to part A with a suitable value to find an approximation of 1.985 power 5. Okay. So मैं काम करता हूँ, I'll take a screenshot of it also and paste it here. Here it is. Okay, so I've done the first part. We have found the first couple of terms. Here they are. Let's paste them here. ठीक हो गया. अच्छा, then it says use your answer to part A with a suitable value of x. Now the question is, where will the suitable value of x come from? Okay, where will this suitable value of x come from if you want to find out the value of this? So the suitable value of x will come like this. You have 1.985 to the power of 5. We're going to equate this to the expression above that we just expanded. 3 upon 2x power 5. Now notice that they're both equal to 5. So that means we'll ignore the powers. We'll just compare the contents inside. So 1.985 is equals to 2 minus 3 upon 2x. So you move 3 upon 2x to the left. Okay, and then you do 2 minus 1.985. So 2 minus 1.985, that is equal to 0.015. Okay. So 3x is equals to 0.015 times 3, so that's 0.03. So x is equals to 0.01. Now what is that suitable value of x that the question was talking about? This is that suitable value of x. And where will you plug this in? You will plug this in the expansion above. Okay, because the question said use your expansion. So you're going to plug this in here. So 32 minus 120 times 0.01 plus 180 times 0.01, the whole thing squared. Okay? So this is a part of binomial. It's not something that's tested very often. So multiply by 2 नहीं होगा. Multiply by 2 कर लिया बेटा. Multiply by 2 भी कर लिया और divide by वो भी कर लिया. ठीक है? Okay. Now moving on. ठीक है, binomial में यही है, there's not a lot. How to find out the, अच्छा, also remember binomial में, if you look at the mock question that we solved yesterday, I would strongly suggest you go over that. ठीक है, let me see if I can find it. तो उसमें क्या था? उसमें ये था कि V1, yeah. If you look at the binomial question that we solved yesterday, उसमें the question made us find out the coefficient of x square. Sorry, the coefficient of x. Okay, and now the question is asking us to find out the coefficient of x in this expansion. It's a 4-mark question. That means while 1 can be multiplied by the coefficient of x from the expansion above, what about 3x squared? So that means from this expansion, you want another coefficient, which is of 1 upon x, so that when you multiply it with the coefficient of x squared, you get the desired coefficient. Achha, what if the powers are not equal? Aisa nahi ho sakta. That's a good question. What if the powers are not equal? But the only way that you can apply that concept is if the powers are equal. Achha, binomial mein, sometimes what will happen is that there will be an exception. Okay, so if there is an exception, meaning that x is not in the first term, x is not in the second term, x is not in both the terms. So what are you going to do? You're going to use your common sense. So for example, if you have 3 plus 2x squared, the whole thing power 4, and the question is asking to find out the coefficient of x power 6, and you want to find out the value of r, so first keep r as it is, then think what should be the value of r so that you can find out the coefficient of x cubed. And the answer to that is 3. So you plug in 3 and then you find out the coefficient of x cubed. Simple. Okay? Now, so as far as binomial is concerned, that's it. Achha, also, I would strongly advise you guys to learn this concept also. ये क्या आप लोगों ने NCR without a calculator? बेटा फॉर्मूला शीट जो है ना, कोई भी सिलेबस खोलो, सिलेबस में MF19 होगी, वहाँ से आपको मिल जाएगा. सर कल रिपोर्टिंग टाइम 1 बजे और जुम्मा भी है, आप क्या करें? बेटा रिपोर्टिंग टाइम 1 बजे है, but I would suggest that you pray जुम्मा to in a masjid that's close to the venue. ठीक है, जुम्मे की नमाज़ आपको 1:15, 1:05, 1:30 तो मेरे ख्याल में थोड़ा रिस्की हो जाएगा, बट 1:30 बजे भी आप पढ़ सकते हैं, फ़र्ज़ पढ़ते ही चले जाइएगा। बट मैंने देखा है कि स्टूडेंट्स जुम्मे की नमाज़ पढ़ रहे होते हैं, ठीक है, पढ़ के फिर फ़ौरन वेन्यू भागते हैं। सो 2 बजे आपका पेपर स्टार्ट है ना, तो नमाज ना स्किप कीजिएगा। दैट्स व्हाट आई वुड सजेस्ट। ओके, सो मेक श्योर दैट यू गाइस डू दिस, ठीक है, मेक श्योर दैट यू गाइस लर्न दिस कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ एनसीआर विदाउट अ कैलकुलेटर। मेरी इस पे वीडियो है, ऑल्दो देयर हैवंट बीन क्वेश्चंस टू ऑफन, बट आपके पास इस तरह के क्वेश्चंस आ सकते हैं that 1 minus x upon 3 the whole thing power n is expanded in ascending powers of x, the coefficient of x square. So what you will have to know is you will have to know how to expand nc2 without a calculator. ठीक है, अगर आपको, if you don't know how to do this, then watch one of my videos, you will learn how to do this, but this is not something that's tested very often, but it is part of the syllabus nonetheless. ठीक है, रमादा के करीब मस्जिद नहीं, क्यों नहीं है? आयशा मस्जिद रमादा के करीब है, बिल्कुल आप पढ़ सकते हैं। आयशा मस्जिद है, मस्जिद सकीना है, although you'll need a car, you can't walk there, but आयशा मस्जिद पे you can walk easily, ठीक है। और क्या, और कौन सी मस्जिद है? और की मस्जिद नहीं। अच्छा, somebody said एक्सपो के करीब, एक्सपो के करीब वो है, बैतुल मुकर्रम है, करीब नहीं है, you might need a car, but किसी से लिफ्ट ले लेना यार, कोई ना कोई तो जा ही रहा होगा, ठीक है। और उसके पीछे भी है, एक्सपो सेंटर के पीछे भी है मस्जिद एक, आई थिंक एक मस्जिद, नाम नहीं मुझे याद आ रहा, बट वो है, बैतुल मुकर्रम तो है फॉर श्योर। ओके, आपको मस्जिद के नाम कैसे आते हैं बेटा? क्या मतलब नाम कैसे आते हैं? खैर, एनीवे, सो लेट्स मूव ऑन। Another question similar to that, the coefficient of x square and the expansion of so and so. So remember to expand NCR without a calculator. So learn this concept. You never know. अगर ये आ गया तो आप सब कहेंगे ओ सर 7 का गेस्ट पेपर लग गया। खैर, that's the reason why I don't do guest papers, because people think कि बस ये पत्थर पे लकीर हो गई बात। खैर, so let's move on. Binomial हो गया हमारा, अब हम देखते हैं APGP. Okay. Now APGP is all about formulas. Okay, APGP is all about formulas, and these formulas are given, ठीक है, but remember you have to read the question, you have to get familiar with the question, don't just brainlessly start solving the question, understand question में क्या given है, only then so I would suggest you solve it, ठीक है। so ये तो काफ़ी basic चीज़ें हैं, ज़रा थोड़े past paper questions इसके देखते हैं। Okay, so let's take this. The question says, in an arithmetic progression, the first term is -10, 15th term is 11, and the last term is 41. Find the sum of all the terms in the progression. Okay. So, arithmetic progression में आपने क्या करना है APGP में? You need to work backwards. Okay. How do you work backwards? Here's how. If the question is asking you to find out the sum of all the terms, that means you can either use this formula or you can use this formula, which is n upon 2 into 2a plus n minus 1 into d. Okay, and if you're working backwards, you need to see what it is that you have and what it is that you need to find out. Simple as that. So, for example, if let's say you decide that you're going to use this formula, okay, this is the more mainstream formula. आपने decide कर लिया कि आपने ये वाला formula use करना है। अच्छा, अब what is it that we have? Find the sum of all the terms. Do we know n? No, we don't. Do we have the first term? Yes, we do. We once again don't know n. Do we have the common difference? No, we don't. So that means now, before I can find out the sum, I need to find out the common difference. I need to find out the number of terms. And that is why you're given this information. You're given that the first term is -10 and you're given that the 15th term is 11, so that you can find out the common difference. And once you have the common difference, you can then find out the number of terms. Why? Because the last term is 41. So you can equate the nth term formula to 41 and find out what is the value of n. So n is equals to 35. Once you figured all that out, that means now you can use the relevant formula and find out the answer. अच्छा, formula sheet मैं आप लोगों को दिखा देता हूँ, formula sheet जो given होगी, लेकिन I hope nobody is entirely relying on the formula sheet, ठीक है। So the formula sheet that you will get is basically this one right here. इसको बोलते हैं हम MF19. Okay, आपको एक पूरी इसकी कॉपी मिलेगी. This is the formula sheet. It has all the mensuration formulas. It has the quadratic formula. It has all the APGP formulas. It has binomial. ठीक है, अच्छा वो जो मैं आप लोगों को बोल रहा था ना NCR की expansion without a calculator, that's right here. So this is NC0, this is NC1, which is equal to n. Okay, and then if you get NC2, so NC2 is basically n into n minus 1 divided by 2 factorial. And then if you get NC3, that is basically right here. Okay, I hope everyone knows what factorial is. Factorial, so 5 factorial would be 5 into 4 into 3 into 2 into 1. Okay. Speak at 1x. बेटा पूरा syllabus complete कराना है. ठीक है, so obviously I need to speed up, और अभी नहीं speed up करूँगा तो कब करूँगा? Okay, so another question. The 12th term of an arithmetic progression is 17 and the sum of the 31 terms is 1023. Find the 31st term. Once again, work backwards. If you want the 31st term, see what it is that you want. So 31st term would mean a plus n minus 1 into d. So you don't have a, you don't have the common difference. You need to first work that out and then find out what it is the question is asking for. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, the first two terms. So once again, अच्छा, APGP में जो ज़्यादातर प्रॉब्लम होती है ना, वो एक तो इस तरह के क्वेश्चंस में होती है. ये देख लो. The sum of the first 9 terms of an arithmetic progression is 117. The sum of the next 4 terms is 91. Find the first term and the common difference of the next of the progression. So basically the sum of the first 9 terms, you can see that these are the sum of the first 9 terms. And then the question says the sum of the next 4 terms. So next 4 terms mean after the 9th term, so you have 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th. Okay, so these are the 4 terms which has the sum 91. And you can't use this 91 in any formula. So because there is no formula which will give you the sum of the next 4 terms. So what you need to do is you need to combine them. Okay, once you combine them, you will have the sum of the first 13 terms, which is equal to 208. Okay, so watch out for questions like these. अच्छा, then there is geometric progression. Geometric progression के भी formulas हैं, वो आप देख लीजिएगा. Sum to infinity का formula है. There is no need to go into what sum to infinity really is. Just memorize the formula. ठीक है. अच्छा, what's that? So would you be able to do question 5? I think I solved the entire February March paper, didn't I? Didn't I solve the entire February March paper live? Achha, now word problems. Let's have a look at ABGP word problems. So the question says, a debt of 3,726 is repaid by weekly payments which are in arithmetic progression. The first payment is 60 and the debt is fully repaid after 48 weeks. So that means the number of terms are 48 and the first term is 60. And what's the total debt? The total debt is basically the sum. Okay? Okay. APGP question February March 25. Chalein, let me see if I can solve that. अगर उसकी basis पे आपका revision हो जाता है, so just a minute. Okay, so I'll look at the February March question and then I'll solve that. Just a minute. और वो करके फिर हम एक छोटा सा नमाज का ब्रेक लेंगे and then we'll come back. Okay, I think I know what question it is that you guys are talking about. Just a minute. ठहरो, मुझे ज़रा बार कोड रिमूव करने दो. Okay. So here we are. Let's see how to do this. So the question says the arithmetic progression has first 5 terms, has first term 5 and common difference 6. ठीक है. For this progression, find the sum of all the terms that lie between 150 and 400. Okay, lie between 150 and 400. So that means I want the term that's greater than 150 and the term that is less than 400. Okay, and I want the sum of all those terms. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब एक काम करते हैं. We know that the general term of this progression would be 5 plus 6d. Okay. So we'll take this 5 plus 6d and we'll set it equal to 150. So that means 6d is equals to 145. That means d is equals to 145 divided by 6. That's equal to... Acha, wait a minute. Sorry. n minus 1 karna tha, sorry. So 5 plus n minus 1 into 6. Sorry, this is... मैंने वो O level वाला formula लगा दिया. खैर, so 5 plus 6n minus 6. So Tn is equals to 6n minus 1. Okay. Now, 6n minus 1 is the general term. Now, we want the terms that lie between 150 and 400. So let's take 6n minus 1 to be equal to 150. Okay. So 6n is equals to 151. We can find out the value of n. So 151 divided by 6, that's equal to 25.16 dot dot dot. अच्छा, अब मुझे ये बताएं आप लोग, question for you guys, कि which term will be the first term that's greater than 150? Which term do you think will be the first term that's greater than 150? If you find yourself in the exam doubting, not knowing whether it's the 25th term or it's the 26th term, here's my suggestion. Find out the 25th term and find out the 26th term. ठीक है, बजाय इसके कि आप बैठ के गौर करें, तुक्के लगाएं. All you got to do is find out the 25th term. The answer is 26, that's correct. But in case you're sitting in the exam doubting, then don't doubt. Okay. Here's what you do. Plug in 25 in place of n. So 6 times 25 plus 1, that's equal to 1, minus 1, sorry. 6 times 25 minus 1, that's equal to 149, which is obviously not what you want. Okay, 149. And then plug in 26, which is basically equal to 155. So this is the term that you want. Okay. Achha, then let's talk about the term that is before 400. So what are we going to do for that? The exact same thing. 6n minus 1 is equals to 400. That means 6n is equals to 401. N is equals to 401 divided by 6. Let's see what that is. 401 divided by 6. That's equal to 66.8. So if n is equals to 66.8, which term do you want? Do you want the 66th term or do you want the 67th term? सोच के बताना. Think before you give me, think before you answer. So once again, you're sitting in the exam doubting. Here's what you have to do. Find out the 67th term, find out the 66th term. The correct answer is 66. Why? Because you want the term that's less than 400. So let's find out the 66th term. So that would be 6 times 66 minus 1, that's equal to 395. अब common sense की बात है कि ये उससे 6 बड़ी होगी, so that means this will be 401. This is obviously not what we want. Okay. Now, what we're going to do is we need to find out the sum of the 26th term. Okay, the sum of the 26th term to the 66th term. Okay, so the sum that we want, I'll write it again. We basically want the sum from the 26th to the 66th term. This is the February-March 2025 paper. Okay. So how can we work this out? We can work this out by finding out the sum of the first 66 terms. Okay, so think of it like this. थोड़ा सा ना ज़रा extra mile चले जाने की आदत बना लो, बहुत सारे चीज़ों में आसानी हो जाएगी. ठीक है? So here's how this works. Let's put some dot 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 in between. Dot dot dot. ठीक है, यहाँ पे भी dot 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 बना देते हैं. So this is the 66th term. T60. Oh, sorry. This is the 26th term. ठीक है, whatever it may be. And this is the 66th term, whatever it may be. Now, if you find out the sum of the first 66 terms, okay, from that, what do you think? You think I should subtract the sum of the first 26 terms? You think that's correct? मैंने जो ये लिखा है, ये सही लिखा है? कि S66 में से मुझे क्या subtract करना चाहिए? If I want the sum of the 26th term to the 66th term, what should I do? What I want is this. This is what I want. Acha, sir, we'll take n to be 25 because we don't want to cancel 5 from 155. Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. So basically, हमें ये चाहिए. So first, we're going to find out the sum of the first 66 terms, correct? And from that, we will subtract the sum of the first 25 terms. ठीक है, so थोड़ा extra mile जाने से आपकी भी ज़िंदगी आसान हो जाएगी and you won't have any doubts. So we need to subtract the sum of the first 25 terms. ठीक है? Okay, now, so let's find out the sum of the first 66 terms. So sum of the first 66 terms would be 66 upon 2 into 2a. So what's the first term? The first term is 5. Plus n minus 1, so that's 65 into the common difference, which is 6. Okay. Now, then from this, we will subtract, okay, whatever this turns out to be equal to. From this, we will subtract the sum of the first 25 terms, which means 25 upon 2 into 2a, which means 2 times 5, plus n minus 1. So n minus 1 means 24 into d, and what's that? That's equal to 6. Okay? Yeah, there was an alternative method in MS. MS में alternative method क्या होगा? MS में alternative method ये होगा कि आप 26 को first term consider करो. Okay, there is an alternative method. Yes, it's possible. The alternative method would be that you consider this as your first term. And how many terms from the 26th to the 66th? 66 minus 26 plus, which is equal to what? Which is equal to 40, and then plus 1. So that means 41 terms. Okay, these are a total of 41 terms. Jaise 1 se leke 10 tak, we don't say 10 minus 1 is equals to 9 terms. No, this is basically 20. 10 1 se leke 10 tak, you have 10 terms. Why? Because 10 minus 1 plus 1, so 1 or 10 ko aapne dono include karna hai. Achha, you don't understand why we changed n to 45? Oh, sorry, n to 25. Here's why. You want the sum of the 26th to the 66th term, correct? You want the sum of the 26th to the 66th term. So that means first you will find out the sum of all the 66 terms. If you subtract the sum of the first 26 terms, then the sum that you will have will basically be starting from the 27th term. Okay? So that is why if you find out the sum of the first 66 terms and from that you subtract the sum of the first 25 terms, you will have the sum of the terms starting from the 26th, then 27th, 28th, 29th, and all the way to 66. Simple. Achha, please don't do that skibidi crap paper. वो edXL में से है. ठीक है, it's not your, it's total crap. Okay, just don't do it. Achha, why did I add 1? How many terms do we have from 1 to 5? Chalo, question for you guys. How many terms do we have from 1 to 5? अगर 1 को भी इंक्लूड करें और 5 को भी इंक्लूड करें तो कितनी टर्म्स बनती हैं? बताओ. हैं 1 to 5 6 टर्म्स बन रही है. बेटा क्या हो गया? मेरे ख्याल में ज़्यादा पढ़ लिया आप लोगों ने. 5 टर्म्स बनेंगी. ठीक है. If we count on our fingers 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. But if I do 5 minus 1, that's 4. Okay, if I do 5 minus 1, that's 4. So that means if you want the terms, okay, then you will have to subtract the 2, and if you want to include both terms, you will subtract the 2 and then you will add 1. So if you want the sum of the 26th till the 66th term, so how many terms are these? These are not 40 terms. Okay, these are not 40 terms. These are basically 41 terms. Because you want to include the 26th term and you want to include the 66th term. ये मैं alternate method की बात कर रहा हूँ. जो आप लोग alternate method बोल रहे थे ना, ये मैं उसकी बात कर रहा हूँ. ठीक है, तो इस alternate method में you want the sum of the first 41 terms, which means, and the first term is basically the 26th term, which is 155, and the 66th term is basically 395. अब आप इनका sum निकालना है. So A is 155. The last term is 395. The number of terms is 41. So 41 upon 2 into 155 plus 395. Remember, जब भी हम inclusive counting करते हैं, okay, जब भी हम inclusive counting करते हैं, तो हम हमेशा plus 1 करते हैं. So for example, 1 से लेके 100 तक कितनी terms हैं? We're not going to say 99, 100 minus 1, which is 99, and then plus 1, because we want to include 1 and we want to include 100 also. So 155 plus 395 into 41 divided by 2, you will get a certain answer, which is 11,275, और इससे भी आपके पास exactly वही answer आएगा, 11,275. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, अब let's quickly do the GP question also, फिर हम break लेते हैं. A geometric progression is such that the second term is minus 120 and the sum to infinity is 160. Find the common ratio. So second term is minus 120 and the sum to infinity is 160. So second term means AR is equals to minus 120 and sum to infinity means A over 1 minus R, which is equal to 160. Now two equations, solve them simultaneously, make A the subject or R the subject. I don't see why this is a difficult question. This is a fairly easy question. Acha, and you will have the value of A. Acha, then आगे भी देख लो. A is equals to minus 120 upon R. Okay, let's plug this in here. So minus 120 upon R divided by 1 minus R is equals to 160. So cross multiply, minus 120 upon R is equals to 160 minus 160. और अब आपने आगे इसको खुद ही solve करना है. You'll have two values of R. The value of R will be 3 upon 2 and the other value of R is equal to minus 1 upon 2. Now which is the common ratio that we're going to take? The common ratio that we're going to take is basically the one that's negative. How do I know that? Because the second term is minus 120. The only way that's possible is if R is equals to minus 1 upon 2. So we're not going to take this. Acha, the first 9 terms of the progression are now removed. Find the sum to infinity of the remaining terms of the progression. Okay. So this is also a difficult question. Let's solve this. So if the first 9 terms are now removed, so ab jitni bhi terms remove kar lein, one thing that will not change is the common ratio. So that means the common ratio is still minus 1 upon 2. But the question is, what's the first term? Okay, what's the first term going to be? So in order to find out the first term, here's what we have to do. If you remove the first 9 terms, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So जो 10th term होगी वो आपकी first term बन जाएगी. Simple as that. Okay, so देख लें आप लोग. Again, no harm in going an extra mile. 4th term, 5th term, 6th term, 7th term, 8th term, 9th term. Okay. If you remove the first 9 terms, that means the 10th term now becomes your first term. Simple as that. The 10th term becomes your first term. So you find out the 10th term. How will you find out the 10th term? The 10th term will be AR power 9. Acha, we didn't work out the value of A. Let's work it out here. So the value of A is equal to minus 120 upon R. So minus 120 over minus 1 upon 2. So A is equals to 240. So the 10th term will be equal to 240 into minus 1 upon 2 raised to the power of 9. So the 10th term is equal to, let's see what we get. 240, bracket open, minus 1 upon 2, the whole thing raised to the power of 9. So we get minus 15 upon 32. Okay, now you have the first term. You have the common ratio, find out the sum to infinity. Sum to infinity is equals to A, okay, over 1 minus R. 1 minus 1 over 2. Work this out. I think the answer turns out to be minus 5 upon 60. That's your sum to infinity. ठीक है? अच्छा अब एक काम करते हैं. Let's take a 10-minute break for namaz. ठीक है? And after that we'll continue. अच्छा जो लोग again की बात करें बेटा stream को आगे पीछे करके देख लो. ठीक है? Save everyone else time. I don't want to hold you guys longer than 10:30 because I want you guys to sleep. Get a good night's sleep. I know paper PM में, but still getting a good night's sleep is very important. Are you sweating? I think I am. थोड़ा AC तेज करते हैं ज़रा. Okay, so मैं एक काम कर रहा हूँ जब तक मैं break ले रहा हूँ. I'm just going to disable the chat altogether. So we're going to take a 10-minute break for namaz and then we'll continue. अभी हो रहे हैं 8:56, हम वापस आएंगे 9:07 पे. ठीक है, 1-2 मिनट ऊपर हो सकता है, सो डोंट फ्रीक आउट. Okay, so welcome back. अच्छा, so I was thinking before we move on to the next chapter, मैं APGP के I know जो आप लोग word problems के questions हैं जिसमें you guys struggle the most, I make you guys solve a few questions. I'll enable the chat for a few minutes. Here we go. Okay, so I've taken out a few questions. Let's go over those. Especially the word problems. So one is from October-November 2017, paper 12. Question number 3. Okay, pay close attention. So it says, each year the value of a certain rare stamp increases by 5% of its value at the beginning of the year. A collector bought the stamp for $1,000 at the beginning of 2005. Find the value at the beginning of 2015, correct to the nearest 100. Now, how many years or how many terms will it be from 2005 to 2015? Think carefully before you answer. ठीक है, 2005 से लेकर 2015 तक कितनी terms होंगी? अच्छा, ये जो converge or divergent, no need to make a big deal. If the common ratio is between -1 and 1, it's a convergent. If it's greater than 1 or lesser than -1, it's divergent. Okay, simple as that. Okay, 15, 2005 to 2010 is 2005 to 2015. It's not 15, it's 11. 11 is the correct answer. Achha, if you find yourself doubting, here's what you can do. So 2005 is the first term. Okay, and the value of the stamp is 10,000. 2006 is the second term. Okay. 2007, it's the third term. Now, notice that from 2005 to 2007, it's 2 years, but the number of terms are 3. Okay, from 2005 to 2007, it's 2 years. It's 2 years. I mean, you might think that 2005, 2007 is 2 years, but the number of terms are 3. Why? Because you have to include 2005. You have to include 2007 as well. Okay, so similarly, when you get to 2015, that means it's basically the 11th term. Okay, now if you want to find out the 11th term, so that means you have to find out the 11th term. Okay, now the value increases, the value of the stamp increases by 5%. Okay, if the value of the stamp increases by 5%, that means this is a geometric progression. So now what's the common ratio going to be? The common ratio will be 100 plus 5 upon 100. Remember, if it's increasing by a certain percentage every year, it's a geometric progression. If it's increasing by a certain value every year, it's an arithmetic progression. So the common ratio is equals to 1.05. And what you want is basically the 11th term. And this is the first term. So simply work this out. 10,000. So the nth term is equals to a r raised to the power n minus 1. So 10,000 into 1.05. Okay, raised to the power of n minus 1. My screen is frozen. Yeah, I think you're right. You are right. My screen is in fact frozen. Just a minute, I'll fix it. Here. So I'll go over what I've done again. So basically 2005 is the first term. 2006 is the second term. 2007 is the third term. 2015 is the 11th term. Why? Because we're counting inclusively. We want to include both years. So 2015 minus 2005 plus 1. So that means the total number of terms are basically 11. So we want the 11th term. Now, what's the first term? The first term is 10,000. What's the common ratio? The way to find out the common ratio is to basically take 100. And since it's increasing by a certain percentage, it's geometric progression, plus 5 divide by 100. This is what the common ratio basically is. Now, what is n going to be? N is going to be 11, 11 minus 1. So that's the answer. 10,000 raised into 1.05 raised to the power of 10. Yeah, you can do that also. You can convert 5 to percentage and then you can add 1 to it. It's the same thing really. Okay, this is the answer. All right, no, I didn't do functions yet. Okay, after this, I think we're going to skip circular measure. It's fairly easy. And we're going to do trigonometry, functions, and everything else, or differentiation, integration. Acha, also, iska part 2 is fairly easy. Acha, there's another question with word problems that I've made. June 2017, paper 11, paper 11, question number 4. May June 2017. Acha, May June 2017, okay. Here, pay attention. Another word problem related question. Every year, a school allocates a sum of money for the library. The amount allocated each year increases by 2.5%. So if the amount is increasing by 2.5%, that means it's 100 plus 2.5 upon 100. So this is going to be 102.5 upon 100. So that means 1.025. Okay, that's the common ratio. Acha. Then the question says, in 2005, the school allocated $2,000. Find the total amount allocated in the years 2014 or 2005 to 2014 inclusive. Now, what is the value of n? What is the value of n? What is the value of n that we're going to take, considering that we have to take from 2005 to 2014 inclusive? We're going to take 10. That's correct. Why? Because 2014 minus 2005 plus 1. That will give us the value of n. So n is equals to what? N is equals to 10. Okay? Why is this lagging? Really? मुझे बताएं कहाँ lag आया? I'll repeat. So we need to find out the sum. Okay, and we need to find out the sum of the first 10 terms. Okay? So a r raised to the power n minus 1 over r minus 1. So you might notice that this formula is slightly different from the one that's given in the syllabus. So don't freak out. There are two formulas for sum. It's either this or you can flip it, as in you can change this. You can multiply the numerator and denominator by minus 1. तो ये formula भी है. ठीक है, अक्सर मैं ये formula लिखता हूँ तो लोग परेशान हो जाते हैं कि ये कौन सा formula. It's the same thing. Okay, so this is, we want basically the sum of the first 10 terms. So a is equal to what? A is equal to 2000. Okay, what's r? R is 1.025. We raise it to the power of 10 minus 1 over, raise it to the power of 10 minus 1 over 1.025 minus 1. There you go. Work this out. You'll get the answer. If they said, let's say if the question said after 2005 or after the first year, okay, the amount allocated till 2014 after the first year. So that means now you don't have to consider 2015. Now you're counting from 2016 onwards. Okay, so you just have to make sure you're reading the question carefully. ठीक हो गया? Okay, now let's go back to the notes. अच्छा चलो, let's have a look at coordinate geometry. So coordinate geometry, all about formulas. Okay, it's not that complicated. So for example, if you want the distance between 2 points, there's a formula for that. Make sure you have the formula memorized. Okay. Then if let's say, actually just a minute, I think I should disable the chat for a few minutes. What formula did I use to acquire r? 100 plus the percentage divided by 100. Okay, 100 plus the percentage increase divided by 100. Simple. All right. Now, for midpoint, there's a formula. Add the x coordinates, divide by 2. Add the y coordinates, divide by 2. For gradient, there's the formula. Now, remember the rules. If you have an upward sloping line, it should have a positive gradient. If you have a downward sloping line, it should have a negative gradient. If you have a horizontal line, it should have 0 gradient. If you have a vertical line, its gradient is infinity. When two lines are parallel, they have the same gradient. Points lying on the same straight line, meaning collinear points, have the same gradient. So if you have multiple points lying on the same straight line, you can pick any two. They will give you the same value of the gradient. Perpendicular lines. Remember, when two lines are perpendicular, the product of their gradients is -1, or you can say that the gradients are negative reciprocal of one another. Okay, so this is just a table to understand how the gradient works. So if you have a line with gradient 2, the line parallel to it will also have gradient 2, perpendicular to it, negative reciprocal. 3 upon 4, parallel, 3 upon 4, perpendicular, minus 3 upon 4. Half, parallel, same, perpendicular, negative reciprocal. Equation of a straight line. So remember, if you have an upward sloping line, it should have an equation like y equals to mx plus c. Downward should also have the same equation, except m will be negative. If you have a horizontal line, its equation will be y equals to the y-intercept. Okay, so 1 for this, y equals to c for this, y equals to 3 for this. Vertical line, general equation is x equals to b, where b is the point where the line cuts the x-axis. Okay, this is simple, very similar to O-levels. That's why I'm not going into a lot of detail. Acha, equation of perpendicular bisector. So remember the rules of perpendicular bisector. It's a line that passes through the midpoint and is also perpendicular. So how do you find out the equation of perpendicular bisector? First of all, you find the midpoint of the line, find the gradient of the line, take the negative reciprocal of the gradient. Okay, so midpoint is basically the point through which it's passed. When you find out the gradient of line AB, because it's a perpendicular bisector, its gradient will be negative reciprocal. Then you form an equation using this. Remember, these are the two things you need in order to find out the equation of a straight line. And also remember a property related to perpendicular bisector, that if there is a perpendicular bisector of AB, then any point on the perpendicular bisector will be equidistant from A and B. Okay? Find the equation. So some examples you guys can go through. Also, somebody here asked me if we can use the shoelace method. अच्छा, shoelace method, वैसे तो मैंने कभी कोई ऐसा question देखा नहीं है जिसमें it can be used, जिसमें you have to use, but if you want to use it, you can do it. ठीक है. अच्छा, shoelace method है क्या? shoelace method मैं आपको एक दफ़ा go through करा देता हूँ. ठीक है. shoelace method की मदद से आप किसी भी quadrilateral का, किसी भी triangle का area निकाल सकते हैं, given that you know the points through which it's passing. Okay, so here's how this works. So first of all, the formula is a bit scary, so don't freak out when you look at the formula. Here it is. This is the formula. Okay, I'll do part A. You guys can do part B yourself, and I'll give you the answer to part B. Part B ka answer is 76. You guys can try that yourself. Okay, so basically what you do is this. You write 1 upon 2. Okay, you make these vertical lines. You write the x coordinate, then the y coordinate, then the x coordinate, then the y coordinate, then the x coordinate, then the y coordinate. A, B, C, D. Okay, so this is point A, x and y. This is point B, x and y written vertically. Point C, x and y written vertically. And then in the end, what you do is you can write them in any order. Okay, as in you can write them A, B, C, D. You can write it D, C, B, A. इस order में भी लिख सकते हैं. But just make sure that you write them the way that you would draw it. So, okay, so for example, if you draw it like this, A, B, C, D, then you write it either in this order or you write it in this order. Okay? Clockwise or anti-clockwise. You pick a point and from that you write it in a clockwise direction or anti-clockwise. Achha, then once you're done writing all the points, in the end, rewrite the point that you started with. Okay? Now what you have to do is you have to multiply from left to right all the terms and you have to add them up. Okay, so multiply the terms from left to right and add them up. So meaning 1 into 5 plus minus 4 into minus 3 plus minus 2 into minus 2 plus 4 into 8, that's 32. Okay, left to right हमने add किया. So now is not the time to go into case who was the founder of this formula, who deserves the credit for this formula. ठीक है, इन बेकार की चीज़ों में अभी ना पड़ेगा. I mean, ये बेकार चीज़ें नहीं हैं. It's good to be curious, but now is not the time to be curious. Now you multiply all the terms from right to left. Okay, and you add them up and you subtract their sum. So 1 times minus 2, that's minus 2. 4 times minus 3, that's minus 12. 5 times minus 2, that's minus 10. Minus 4 times 8, that's minus 32. Okay, so 5 plus 12, that's 17. So why am I not using a calculator? I think मुझे लग रहा है मैं O-levels पढ़ा रहा हूँ क्योंकि कल O-levels का ही पेपर है. So this is 53 minus 2, minus 12, minus 10, minus 32. So that's minus 56. ठीक है. अच्छा, ये जो हम दो vertical lines बना रहे हैं, ये हम ऐसे ही नहीं बना रहे. ये हम इसलिए बना रहे हैं so that if in case the answer inside this turns out to be negative, because we're finding out area, we will give the answer as negative, as positive only. So you get 109. Okay, 109 gets multiplied by 1 upon 2, or simply gets divided by 2, which is equal to 54.5. And since this is square, so it's going to be square units. Okay, so just remember, you write down all the points. In the end, you just rewrite the point that you started with. Okay, whatever point you start with, you rewrite that point. So if you're starting from B, if you write it in this order, B, C, D, A, in the end, you will write down B. Whatever point it is that you start with, you will rewrite that. Then you multiply from left to right, you add them up. Then you multiply from right to left, you add them up, you subtract the two results, and you do multiply by half, you'll get the area. And you can use this for any polygon, given that you know the coordinates of all its vertices. Okay, that's how this works. All right, now, these are some properties of some important shapes. I would suggest that you memorize them, okay, along with kite. ठीक है, kite की भी याद कर लो. इसका screenshot लेने चाहें आप लोग, ठीक है, although you can download all these notes, they're on my website, mathletebysart.com. So when it comes to a kite does not have equal diagonals. It does not have diagonals that intersect at midpoint, but it does have diagonals that are perpendicular. Okay? Because sometimes, like if you remember, we were solving a question of equation of circles, the one that I gave in the second mock. So there was a square and we had to use this property that the diagonals are perpendicular, or maybe we had to use this property that the diagonals intersect at midpoint. Okay? All right. Now, some example questions. Okay. Acha, also, this is an important concept, which is angle between two lines. Not very frequently tested, but it's a concept that's important nonetheless. Okay? And there has been a question in October, November 2022. Just a minute, let me have a question, don't know. So I'll look for that question in a minute, but first let me walk you through that concept. So basically, if you want to find out the angle between the two lines, two tangents, two lines, doesn't matter. You take the absolute value of modulus value of, meaning that the positive value of m1 minus m2, meaning the difference between the two gradients, and 1 plus m1 m2. Okay, and then that will give you tan theta. Once you take tan inverse of it, you will basically get the gradient. Okay, now there has been a question, like I said. I will quickly solve that here. It was from October, November 2022. अगर मुझे नहीं मिला तो I'll enable the chat and then you guys can tell me. Okay, I found it. Great. So this is a question. We're not going to do the first part. Okay. This is the part that we're interested in. The question says the acute angle between the two tangents is denoted by alpha. Okay. And the scales on the axes are the same. Find alpha. So like I said, not very frequently tested, but it's an important concept nonetheless. So let me take a screenshot of it. Paste it here. What exactly is the deal here? The deal here is that you have a line which is tangent to this curve, then you have another line which is tangent to this curve. Okay? Which means you need their gradients. Okay, so you need their gradients before we start. Now there is a way, we'll learn a calculator trick also. There is a way with the help of which you can find out the gradient at a certain point. So this red line is basically tangent to this curve. So I want the gradient of this red line, which I'm going to call, I'll call this line 1, so it has gradient 1. So how will I find m1? m1 will basically be dy by dx at x equals to 4. And dy by dx of what? Of this curve. Okay, so let's use our calculator so that we learn another calculator trick also, that is how to find out the gradient at a certain point. Okay, so shift this. You don't have to differentiate, your calculator will differentiate for you. 1 upon 2 x squared minus x plus 1. What's the value of x at which you want the gradient? That's 4. So that means the gradient of this line is equals to 3. So m1 is equal to 3. We'll put this on the side. Now let's talk about m2. m2 is this line which is tangent to the curve at the same point 4, 5, but the equation of the curve is this. So m2 is basically dy by dx at x equals to 4, but the difference is that dy by dx of a different curve. Okay, so once again, we will find out the gradient using the calculator, gradient of tangent. So it's 2x raised to the power half. Okay, so type it as it is. No need to make any changes. Plus 1. So m2 is equals to 0.5. And make sense of your answer. Both these lines are upward sloping, so they better have a positive gradient. This line is steeper than the other one, so it better have gradient which is greater than the other one. And all that boxes are checked. Now we're supposed to find out the angle in between. So tan of alpha, okay, remember the formula? That tan theta is equals to modulus, which means the positive value of m1 minus m2. Once again, no need to find out where this formula comes from. Now is not the time. You can do that in the summer break if you're interested. So m1 minus m2, meaning 3 minus 0.5 over 1 plus 3 into 0.5. If this is negative, don't forget to take the positive value of it. So let's do this. 3 minus 0.5 over 1 plus, now we know what 3 into 0.5 is, so I'll just write it as 1.5. So we're looking at tan alpha to be equal to 1, which means alpha is equals to tan inverse of 1. So tan inverse of the answer, which means it's equal to 45. Read the question carefully. See if the question wants the answer in degrees or in radians. Because the question here said alpha degrees, it's understood that it's to be given in degrees. And that's it. Job done. Okay. So not a very frequently tested concept, but it's an important concept nonetheless. Okay. No need to go into what ifs, what if this, what if that. Leave that for later. So now let's talk about coordinate geometry part 2, which is basically equation of circles. Now remember, to find the equation of a circle, you need the center and you want the radius. Okay, how do you find, if you're given the equation of a circle, then how do you find the center? So basically this is what the equation looks like. Whatever is inside the bracket with x, the constant, you change the sign, that's the x coordinate of the center. You change the sign of this, that's the y coordinate of the center. Now there is a derivation of the equation of a circle. No need to go into that. Okay, some very easy questions. The properties that I want, the important stuff is this. So if you're given the equation of a circle like this, remember you have to bring it in completed square form. So get all the x's on one side. Leave a bit of space so that you can add the constant. What are you going to add here? You're going to add half of the coefficient of x. And you will do that on the other side as well. Here you're adding 10 squared because 20 is the coefficient of y, so square of half of the coefficient of y, and that's why you're adding 10 on the other side as well. So now you have it in completed square form. You can tell that the x coordinate of the center will be 4, y coordinate of the center will be minus 10, and the radius will be equal to square root of 6. Okay. अच्छा, अब कुछ important चीजें related to circle properties to remember. Angle opposite to the diameter is equals to 90 degrees. You never know. There may be a question where you have to use this property, like for example the question here. The circle passes through so and so points. Show that OA is the diameter of the circle and find the equation of the circle. How will you show that OA is the diameter? Because if OA is the diameter, that means angle opposite the diameter is equal to 90 degrees, and these 3 points are on the circumference because the circle passes through them. So one way to prove that OA is the diameter is by finding out all 3 lengths, and because it's a 90-degree triangle, you can show that the hypotenuse squared is equals to base square plus perpendicular square. Or you can find out the gradient of line AB and show that it's basically the negative reciprocal of the gradient of line OB. That's another way to show that OA is in fact the diameter. So also this is an important property that if you draw a line from the center, a perpendicular line, then it will bisect the chord, meaning it will cut the chord into 2 equal parts. Another important property is that if you have 2 tangents meeting at an external point, they will be equal in length. ठीक है, equation of circle पे मेरी detailed videos हैं in which I've covered the concept, I've covered the topic. You can watch AdMath videos also if you want. So you can cover this all through that. Achha, BOAT is a kite, which means the diagonals OT and AB will be perpendicular. Okay, an important property that the diagonals will be perpendicular. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a square, but because it's a kite, so the diagonals will be perpendicular irrespective. Okay, Now, if you're given 3 points through which a circle is passing and you're asked to find the equation of a circle, this could be a 6 to 8 mark question. So here's what this looks like. This is 1 point, this is the other point, this is the third point. First thing you will do is you'll find out the equation of the perpendicular bisector of PQ. Okay. Then you will find out the equation of the perpendicular bisector of QR. Now, these are two perpendicular bisectors to the chord. Where do the perpendicular bisectors to the chord pass through? They pass through the center. So these two perpendicular bisectors are passing through the center. So that means you will solve these two equations simultaneously. Okay, and that will give you the point of intersection, which is basically the center of the circle. ठीक हो गया? Once you have the coordinates of the center, you will then use any point with the center, either P, Q, or R. You'll find the radius, and you will have find the radius, and then you can form the equation. Okay, so it's a lengthy process, which is why it can carry around 6 to 8 marks. Achha. So here's an example question. Yeah, and then some past paper questions. I would strongly encourage you to watch the stream in which I've solved some past paper questions, and also watch yesterday's mock solution in which I've solved the equation of the circle. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब next is, now I want some input from you guys. Should we skip circular measure? I'll enable the chat. Just give me a yes or no. ठीक है? पूरी कहानी ना लिखिएगा, just a yes or no. Should we skip circular measure? Circular measure is just formulas. Yalla khair. Okay. No, yes, no, 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 yes, yes, yes. अच्छा मैं क्यों इतनी ख्वारी कर रहा हूँ? एक काम करते हैं. Let's just have a poll. अच्छा, hold on. Skip circular measure, yes, no. Circle question of Feb March. I've solved that question in the equation of circle stream. I know which question you're talking about. I've solved 8 plus r, 6 plus r की बात कर रहे हैं. I've solved that question in the equation of circle stream, so you can watch it from there. So please tell the formula for radius of circle for extended equation of circle. Anusha, मैंने पसंद नहीं किया उसको यूज़ करना. I always prefer to bring it in completed square form and then turn it into, and then use it to find the radius. Okay, that's what I preferred, because if you want the radius, chances are you want the center also, so might as well bring it in completed square form. Sir, उसके बहुत complicated questions आते हैं, don't skip. चलो एक काम करते हैं, because it's so close, I will feel almost guilty skipping it. ठीक है, I also want a good night's sleep, so I will not skip it. So now remember, circular measure is basically about formulas. Okay, it's all about formulas, and the formulas are given. Okay, you're given the formulas, so you have to use the. But also, अच्छा ये part irrelevant है, degree to radian conversion. ठीक है, ये अब आप लोगों को आता होगा. You've used it multiple times. So these are all the formulas that are given. So when I'm teaching this, I usually like to show where these formulas come from. But right now is obviously not a good time. ठीक है. So we're just going to jump straight into questions. Now remember, when it comes to circular measure, it's very important that you plan your answer. Okay, very, very important that you plan your answer. Reason why a lot of you get this wrong is because you're just so worked up and you just want to start the question as soon as possible. That's why you mess it up. So what you want to do is, for example, in this question, you want to find out the perimeter of the shaded region. So notice the planning that I've done. You want the arc length, you want dB, and you want CB. Okay. Now, how will you get CB? The question, I think, says something about this being an isosceles triangle or something like that. Yeah, so we're given this is 6 and this is 6. So it's understood that this is an isosceles triangle. So if this is an isosceles triangle, that means the sum of the angles will be pi radian. So you'll do pi minus 1.8 divide by 2, and you will get one angle. Okay, once you have one angle, then you will first find out this length. Remember, in circular measure, you might have to use sine rule, you might have to use cosine rule. Everything that you do in math becomes assumed knowledge. Okay? Everything that you do in math becomes assumed knowledge. Okay? So keep that in mind. Okay, so what you do then is, you find out you need the radius before you can find out the arc length. So you find out AC, that's the radius. Okay, acha, agar ye radius is, so that means this is also the radius. You can then use that to find out the arc length. If this is the radius, that means this is also the radius. You can subtract 6 from 9.4, which is the radius, to get this length, and that's it. Now it's all a matter of putting it together. This, and this, add them up, you'll have the answer. Next part is area of the shaded region. Once again, plan your answer. In order to find out the area, you want to find out the area of the sector. From that, you want to subtract the area of the triangle. That will give you the answer. ठीक है? अच्छा, so question number 2. Once again, plan your answer. अच्छा, यहाँ पे कुछ rules का ख्याल रखना कि you don't have to find out all of the shaded region at once. What you can do is you can divide it into 2. And if you divide a line here, if you draw a line here, then whatever this angle is, this angle will be bisected, meaning that this angle will be divided into 2. Okay? All right. Now, so if you want the perimeter, how many lengths do you want? You want this arc length. You want this length, and whatever this length is, the other length will be equal to the same. Okay, and because it's a 90-degree triangle, that means you can use sine, cos, and tan, no problem. Achha, the area of the shaded region, आप कैसे निकालोगे? First find out half the area of the shaded region, and then double it, you will have the other shaded region. Now, how will you find out half the area of the shaded region? First find out the area of the triangle. You can use half into base into height, or you can use half AB sine C. Okay, all the formulas that you do in math, you can use them here also. So half AB sine C use kar lo, half into base into height use kar lo, that's up to you. And then find out half the area of the shaded region, and then just double it, get the answer. Achha, then there are some difficult questions also. Achha, for circular measure, once again, I would advise you to watch the question that I solved in yesterday's mock, because honestly, this topic is all about planning. Okay, watch the question that I solved in yesterday's mock and watch the question. I did a stream on it. I did a stream categorically solving the difficult questions. So I would suggest you watch that also. ठीक है? अच्छा, अभी हम आते हैं trigonometry की तरफ. अब देखो, trigonometry में क्या-क्या concepts हैं? You have trigonometric graphs. You have trigonometric graphs with transformations, introduction to quadrants, basic trigonometric equations with range altering, trigonometric identities. These are the concepts. Now, trigonometric graphs, the basic ones. The graph of y equals to sine x, you should know what the shape of sine x is. You should know what the maximum value is 1, minimum value is -1. The formula for calculating the amplitude is maximum value minus minimum value divided by 2. Okay, the natural period, basically the number of degrees it takes to complete one cycle is 360 degrees or 2 pi. ठीक हो गया? Okay. Now y equals to cos x. Here are basically the values that you need to draw the graph of y equals to cos x. Achha, also remember that when sketching the graph of sine x or cos x, the interval that we take is 90 degrees. Okay, so we plug in values after every 90-degree interval, and then we find out y values. Now that changes depending on the coefficient of x. ठीक हो गया? So cos की जो भी range होती है वो 1 or -1 होती है, amplitude is 1, natural period is equal to 360 or 2 pi. Okay? The graph of tan is slightly unique, okay, is one of a kind because it has an asymptote. Why? Because tan 90 is infinity. Then at 45 it's 1, at 0 it's 1, don't forget that. After 90 it starts from negative infinity, at 135 it's -1, at 180 it's 0, at 225 it's 1, and at 270 it's infinity again. Okay, and then once again it starts from negative infinity and ends at 360. In tan, however, the step that we take, meaning that the number of degrees after which we plug in values, is basically equal to 180 degrees. Now this also is something that you can do in your calculator, but this only makes sense to do if the question is in degrees. So like for example, there's this table feature in your calculator. Take a table feature pe aap jaoge. What you want to draw is tan x. So you write tan x, close the bracket. Gx, that means if you want to draw something else, no, we don't want to do that, so you skip that. Where do you want to start? We want to start at 0. Where do you want to end? We want to end at 360. What's the step? The step is 45. Press equals to again, and you have all the values. At 0, it's 0, you can see that. At 45, it's 1, you can see that. Now, error in the calculator basically means infinity. At 135, it's -1, you can see that. Scroll down for the rest of the values. 180, it's 0. 225, इसको हम बोलते हैं table feature. 225 is 1, 270 infinity, and the same pattern continues. Now, the reason why we're able to draw 2 cycles, as you can see, is because the natural period of tan is 180 degrees. And the range that we're given, is 360. That's why we're able to draw 2 cycles. And there is no such thing as amplitude in the case of tan. And like I said, natural period is basically equal to 180 degrees or pi. So basic shape आपको सारे graphs का याद होना चाहिए. ठीक है? Okay, now. Then there are some changes. So for example, if you do sine x plus 1, you can see that the graph has shifted 1 unit. Okay, so you can make a table, or you can find out the values manually, or you can use your calculator. Acha, when the values are in radian, then the problem that I have in using a calculator is this. So for example, you want to draw the graph of y equals to 2 cos x. So 2 cos, close the bracket, x, press equals to, skip this. Start at 0. Where do you want to end? You want to end at 2 pi. Now, what's the step that we're going to take? We're going to still going to take 90 degrees, except 90 degrees is basically pi upon 2 in radian. अब जो मुझे problem है ना इसमें वो मुझे ये है कि students wouldn't know which value is which. So 0 is 2. That's pretty straightforward. But how would you know what this is in terms of pi? Okay, so that's basically the problem that I have, which is why I prefer that you make a table like this, and then you plug in values in your calculator manually, like this, that 2 cos, make a fraction, and you say pi upon 2, close the bracket, do it like this. Okay, the table feature is not exactly a game changer, but it's something that you should know how to use. Okay, now this is basically the cheat sheet. The cheat sheet for drawing any trigonometric graph there is. Why? Because sometimes the period changes. And how do you calculate the new period? It's 360 divided by the coefficient of x. Okay, or 2 pi divided by the coefficient of x. And it's the coefficient of x, which is normally b, that determines the period. Okay, so the coefficient of trigonometric function a is basically the amplitude, which is maximum minus minimum upon 2, and this only applies to sine and cos. To calculate the new period, you take the natural period divided by the coefficient of x. For tan, you do 180 upon the coefficient of x or pi upon the coefficient of x, because that is what the natural period of tan is. Now the new step, notice that I've written a star over here, is basically 90 divided by the coefficient of x or pi upon 2 divided by the coefficient of x for sine and cos, and 45 divided by the coefficient of x or pi upon 4 divided by the coefficient of x for tan. But इस star के पीछे क्या मतलब है? इस star के पीछे मतलब ये that this is not fixed. The step basically depends on the grid provided. Okay, so sometimes we look at the grid, and grid में जिस इस तरह से values दी हुई होती हैं, we plug in values according to that. So for example, if the grid has values with intervals of pi upon 3, so we'll plug in with intervals of pi upon 3. Okay, so these are some examples. Now you can see that the natural period of cos 2x has now changed. The period for sine 2x is different. So the graph in red is basically the graph of sine 2x. इसको हम क्या बोलते हैं? We call this a stretch parallel to the x-axis scale factor half. Okay, why? Because all the values of x are being halved. Now x works the other way around. When you multiply x by 2, the values get divided by 2. Okay, so here also you can see that the graph of cos has shrunk. Earlier it used to end at 360, now it's ending at 180. Why? Because of multiplying x by 2, all the values of x get divided by 2. Here also you can use your table feature if the values are in degrees. If they're in radian, then that can be slightly problematic. So here you can see that this is the graph of y equals to 2 cos 3x minus 1. Now what would be the step? The step that we will take will be pi upon 6. Why is that? Because pi upon 2 is what we normally take, but now we divide the step by the coefficient of x, which is 3, as you can see. So the new step is pi upon 6. So that means we plug in values after every pi upon 6 radian. And you can see that the new period will be 2 pi upon 3. Why? Because 2 pi is the natural period, 3 is the coefficient of x. That means after every 2 pi upon 3 radian, you will have one cycle end. And why have we drawn 3 cycles? We haven't drawn 3 cycles because the coefficient of x is 3. We've drawn 3 cycles because the range allows us to draw 3 cycles. The range is still 2 pi and one period is 2 pi upon 3. That's why we've drawn 2 cycles. ठीक हो गया? Okay. Then these are some questions where you have to look at the graph and then you have to find out the equation. So I'll walk you through this also. To find the amplitude, to find A, what you do is you take the maximum value, you take the minimum value, minus them, divide by 2. So you have the value of A. Now what's the period of this graph? The period of this graph is pi. So what's the formula with the help of which I can find out the period? This is the formula. New period, which is pi, is equals to natural period divided by the coefficient of x, which is b. That gives us the value of b. So now, the graph of sine is meant to start from 0. Why? Because sine 0 is 0. This graph is starting from 5, so that means that's probably because it has been translated. And what is that translation? That's basically because of c, so therefore c is equals to 5. Okay? And then there are some other examples that you guys can go through. So that's how this basically works. Also now trigonometric equations. Now trigonometric equations, the rules are, first of all, you determine the quadrant. If it's positive, okay, remember if a trigonometric function is positive, it's going to be in the first and some other quadrant. Okay, you find out alpha. How do you find out alpha? By taking the inverse of the positive value. And then you find out theta or x by going in an anti-clockwise direction if it's positive, and you go in a clockwise direction if it's negative. Okay, so remember the rules of theta here. Remember, okay, let's have a look at the rules of alpha. It's always positive, always acute, always measured from the horizontal axis. So these angles are all the basic angles. Then theta or x, these are angles that are measured from the positive horizontal axis. You go in an anti-clockwise direction if it's positive, you go in a clockwise direction if it's negative. Okay, and they have no fixed range. Okay, now, so here are some examples. So for example, cos x equals to minus 0.5, you'll find alpha by taking cos inverse of the positive value, which is 60, and then you will write down the appropriate quadrant. So if it's in the second and the third quadrant, in the second quadrant, it's going to be 180 minus 60. In the third quadrant, it's going to be 180 plus 60. So what if you have to alter the range? When you can also have questions like these. So this is also an example of a disguised quadratic equation. You can do it as it is, or you can use substitution and then do it. But normally in situations like these, keep an eye out for the range, because depending on the range, you will see the number of solutions. So because it's from 0 to 180, that means only the quadrants that are in the solutions that are in the first two quadrants are to be considered. The rest of the solutions will not be considered. Okay, now we have some trigonometric equations that are slightly complex. So here, if the range allows you to go beyond 360, what do you do? For solutions in the next cycle, you add 360. Okay? If let's say the range is minus, then you will go in a clockwise direction. So once again, the same four quadrants, A, S, T, C, that remains the same. But because the range is minus, we are now going in a clockwise direction. So what will happen if you go in a clockwise direction? So you will calculate this angle the same way, 180 minus 45, which is equal to 135. But because you've gone in a clockwise direction, you'll put a minus sign. So similarly here, you will work this out the same way, 180 plus 45, which is 225. But because you've gone in a clockwise direction, you'll put a minus sign. Okay, now, some examples which we're going to skip. Okay, now range altering, very important. So if let's say you have sine 2x equals to 0.5 and the range that you're given is for x. So first thing that you do is you alter the range. Okay, you alter the range, you bring the range equal to the angle it is that's in the equation. You solve it the way that you solve any other trigonometric equation. You determine the quadrants, you find out the value of x, but be careful. Now you're solving not for x, but you're actually solving for 2x. Okay, so in the first quadrant, it's 30. In the second quadrant, it's 180 minus 30, which is 150. But here's the thing. Your range of 2x allows you to go beyond one complete cycle. So what we're going to do is that we're going to add 360 to the first solution. We're going to add 360 to the next solution. Okay, and even if let's say you add 360 to 390 and you realize that it's outside the range, simply cross it out. Okay, so once again, don't make any tricks, don't make any formulas for this, just simple trial and error. Keep on adding 360 till your answer lies inside the range. The second it's outside the range, cross it out. And if you want to, let's say, find out the solution in the previous cycle, you will subtract 360. Okay? So if I want to find out the solution of sine 2x equals to 0.5 in the negative range, I will subtract 360 from the first two solutions. And if let's say there's a certain value which is inside the range, I will consider it. If there's a certain value which is not, I will not consider it. It's really as simple as that. Okay, now You can't leave your final answer as 2x. You have to leave it as x. So here are all the values of x that are basically part of the solution. Okay. Then there are some identities. So the identities that you have are sine theta upon cos theta, which is tan theta, and sine square theta plus cos square theta is equals to 1. These are the two identities that you have. Here I've done the derivation of it. No need to look into that. And also remember that if you square times tan square theta, that will be equal to sine square theta upon cos square theta. Some rules regarding identities. Here, let's pay attention to them. Number 1, always start with the more complex side. Okay. Number 2, always bring every trig function in terms of sine and / or cos. So because everything can be expressed using sine and cos, so it's always best to bring everything in terms of sine and cos. Watch out for the third algebraic identity. अब ये काफ़ी sneaky identity है, ये कहीं पे भी आ जाएगी. You won't even notice that it's there. Like for example, यहाँ पे. So it's a square minus b square. You may be so fixated on thinking of trigonometric identity, you won't even realize that this is there. Okay, so watch out for the third algebraic identity. Do not treat it like an equation, meaning do not move values from the left-hand side to the right-hand side and vice versa. And here's another point that I would like to add, and that is you can also work on the right-hand side, okay? Not as official working, but only to get an idea of what to do on the left hand side. ठीक है, अब इसका क्या मतलब है? इसका मतलब ये है कि if let's say the right hand side is 1 minus cos square x. So what you can do is you can on the side write 1 minus cos square x as sine square x. So that means now that you have an idea, okay, on the left hand side you got to have 1 minus cos square x in order to make it sine square x. Okay? So similarly, if on the right hand side you have tan square x, so that means tan square x can actually be written as sine square x upon cos square x. Okay, so it's not part of your official working, but you've just done this on the side so that you know what it is that you should do on the left hand side. So left hand side ka matlab, ab now you need to somehow bring it as sine square x upon cos square x so that you can turn it to tan square x. Okay, so you can do that. You cannot work on both sides at the same time, but you can do it just as a side note for your own understanding as to what it is that you need to do on the left hand side. Okay. Now trigonometric identities mein these are the best tips that I can give you. There's nothing else that I can tell you about trigonometric identities. A major part of it is trial and error. Sometimes you solve it a certain way, you realize that's not the way that it's meant to be done. You do it some other way. It's simple, as simple as that. Okay? So don't waste time and don't think that you will be able to do it right in the first attempt. And if you're not able to do it, that doesn't mean that you can't do it right at all. You may be able to do it in the second attempt. And you may take like an attempt or two for you to get it right. Okay, now, अब बात करते हैं functions की. ठीक है, अब देखो functions में भी I'm afraid that a lot of you are still looking for shortcuts. ठीक है, there aren't any shortcuts in functions. Simple as that. Okay, I'll enable the chat for a minute ताकि आप लोग अपनी कुछ बढ़ास निकाल लें. Okay. So please do not look for shortcuts in functions. Okay, there isn't a shortcut in functions, especially when it comes to finding domain and range. You have to get friendly with the function. I don't know how many times I have said this already. But that's the way that it's supposed to be done. Okay, no shortcut. Simple as that. Okay, now. So remember the rules that if you have a one-to-one function, okay, if you have a one-to-one function, that means it could be a linear function, it could be an exponential function. Now, what's a one-to-one function? One-to-one function is where when input gives you only one output, okay? What's a many-to-one function? A many-to-one function is where there are multiple inputs that give you the same output. ठीक हो गया? Now, a one-to-many relation is not a function. It's kind of like a circle where you have one input giving you multiple outputs. Okay? Now, f of x, acha, ye sab basic stuff hai. I'm gonna just skip through it. Now there are some graphical tests which I want you guys to understand. If, for example, it's a vertical line test. Now, vertical line test is used so that you can distinguish a function from a non-function. Okay? A horizontal line test is basically used to distinguish a one-to-one function from a many-to-one function. So if, let's say, a horizontal line cuts it at 2 points, that means it's a function, but it's not a one-to-one function. But if a vertical line, wherever you draw it, cuts it at only 1 point, that means it's a function. ठीक है, circle function इसलिए नहीं है because vertical line cuts it twice, so it's not a function. A quadratic function is a function, but it's not a one-to-one function. Why? Because it cuts it twice. Acha. Can, however, these functions be made into converted into a one-to-one function? Of course. What you can do is, especially a quadratic function, you can hide a certain part of it and it will turn into a one-to-one function. So like for example, if I hide this part of it, or if, for example, I hide the part before it, it's a one-to-one function. If, for example, I only take this part, I hide the part after it, it's a one-to-one function, okay? So a quadratic function can be turned into a one-to-one function if you change the domain to either after the x-coordinate of the turning point or before the x-coordinate of the turning point. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा. Now, what is domain? Domain are basically all the values that can be plugged into a function. And what's range? Range is what you get as a result. ठीक है? So for example, इसमें मैं 2 नहीं plug in कर सकता, so 2 is not part of the domain. इसमें, in order to keep this function alive, I need to plug in all the values that are greater than or equal to 0. So that's basically the range. No, that's basically the domain. अच्छा, this is some basic stuff. No need to go over it. अच्छा, एक चीज़ very important. वो ये कि a one-to-one function is either always an increasing function or a decreasing function, but never both. ठीक है? So if it's a quadratic curve, it could either be something like this, it could either be something like this, but it will never be doing both. Like for example, this is a many-to-one function. This is increasing as well as decreasing. So it's decreasing and increasing. However, a one-to-one function is always either increasing or decreasing, but it's not doing both. Okay, a many-to-one function will, however, be both increasing and decreasing under a given domain. So like for example, sine, this is increasing, decreasing, increasing. And why is it doing that? Because it's a many-to-one function. What's the test for it? A horizontal line cuts it twice, so that therefore it's a many-to-one function. अच्छा, quadratic function की range निकालने के लिए बेहतरीन तरीका है that you make a rough sketch. Okay, a rough sketch will do wonders for you. It will open a lot of doors for you. So make sure that you make a rough sketch, especially when it comes to finding the range of a quadratic function, and turn it into completing square form so that you can see where the turning point is and you can find out the range accordingly. ठीक है? अच्छा, in order to find out the range of a one-to-one function, we can simply plug in 2 endpoints and the domain and of the domain and give answer in range form. But in order to find out the range of a many-to-one function, we have to make a sketch to find the minimum/maximum value before stating the range. Okay, this is especially true for a quadratic function. Achha, how to turn a quadratic function which is many-to-one to a one-to-one function? You change the domain to either greater than equal to or greater than h, or you change it to either lesser than or equal to or lesser than h. If x-coordinate of the domain if x-coordinate of the turning point is inside the domain, it's a many-to-one function. If x-coordinate of the turning point is outside the domain, it's a one-to-one function. Meaning, अगर मैं इसका, for example, इस function के domain को मैं कर दूँ 3 to 5. Okay, so it's a one-to-one function. If I keep -2 to 3, so that means it's from here to here. So the turning point is inside, it's a many-to-one function. Another reason to identify that it's a many-to-one function is because from this point to this point, it's decreasing as well as increasing. Okay, but from 3 to 5, it's constantly increasing. So therefore, this part is the one-to-one function. Okay, so make a rough sketch before you write down the range. अच्छा, अब for questions like these, इस तरह के questions में आप लोग हमेशा problem करते हो. ठीक है, और इसलिए problem करते हैं because you're always looking for shortcuts. I don't know कब वो दिन आएगा where you guys will be comfortable with the idea of trial and error. I hope soon. So basically, if you have something like this, okay, मैं इसको separately चलो on the side कर लेता हूँ because there have been questions like these. Okay. So how will you find out the range of function like this? Please get friendly with the function. Plug in 0, what happens? 3 upon 2 times 0 plus 1. So that basically means plugging in 0 has given you what? Has given you 3 upon 1, which is equal to 3. Okay? Plug in a value greater than 0. Let's say you plug in 1. So 3 upon 2 times 1. Okay, I'll just write it directly. 2 plus 1, so that's equal to 3 upon 3, which is equal to 1. Plug in 2, that's 3 upon 5, which is equal to 0.6. ठीक है, अब देखो हमें एक trend मिल गया कि 3 is the greatest value and all the other values are gradually decreasing. There will come a point where the value that you plug in, because there is no upper limit, the value that you will plug in will become so large that the denominator will almost reach infinity. And what's 3 upon infinity? Think of it this way. You have 3 slices of pizza which you have to distribute in all of Karachi. Then everybody will just get a share that's as good as 0. Okay? So what's the range? This is the part where I say that you have to get comfortable with the function, that this is what you have to do. What's the range? The range you can see is greater than 0 but less than 3. ठीक है, ये आंसर है इसका. There you go. Okay, but now अब हो सकता है आप लोग बोलें सर ये आपने 0 क्यों plug in किया? 0 तो domain में है ही नहीं, तो how dare you plug in 0? Right, I know that it's not part of the domain. Now look at this. What's the value that I'm getting after plugging in 0? I'm getting 3. So because 0 is not part of the domain, I did not include 3 as part of the range. Simple as that. Okay, just because x is greater than 0 doesn't mean that if you plug in 0, the whole thing's going to explode or something. You can still plug in 0. You will still get a value, and just know that the range does not include that value because the domain is not included in that value. Simple as that. Okay? All right, let's do another example. Let's say I have something like this. G of x equals to 1 upon x plus 2 for x is greater than 0. Okay, I repeat, if you're not going to get friendly with the function is not going to get friendly with you, and you will lose marks. Simple as that. So don't take that advice lightly, please. Here we go. G of x equals to 1 upon x plus 2, x is greater than 0. So once again, let's plug in 0. So if I plug in 0, ठीक है, कोई गुनाह नहीं मिल जाएगा. If you plug in a value that's not actually included in the domain, just remember that whatever you get as the range, don't include it. So plugging in 0, 1 upon 0 gives you what? 1 upon 0 gives you infinity. Okay, so that means this is basically as good as infinity. Okay? If you plug in 1, so you get 1 upon 1 plus 2. Okay, which is equal to what? Which is equal to 3. Let's plug in one more value. So 1 upon 2 plus 2, that's equal to 2.5. Then plug in the greatest value, infinity. Because x is greater than 0, right? So that means there's no upper limit to it. Now if you plug in infinity, you have 1 upon infinity plus 2. Now what's 1 upon infinity? That's as good as 0. Okay, that's as good as 0. कल बहुत लोग बहस कर रहे थे. I don't know what the issue was, but they were basically unable to understand that anything divided by infinity is basically equal to 0. Okay, and I will suggest that you watch yesterday's mock, the stream in where the part in which I've solved the functions question. I think it was question number 5 of the mock, but I would strongly suggest you watch that. But anyway, this is as good as 0. 0 plus 2 is equals to 2. So that means the range is in between infinity and 2. Infinity is the greatest value. 2 is the least value. So what's the range going to be? The range is going to be g of x is greater than 2. Simple as that. Okay? Now, composite function is when you plug in one function into the other function. Now, I did 2 dedicated streams on domain and range. If you guys are still confused, you can check that out. So f of g means that you plug in function g in function f. Okay, now this part is pretty basic. I think the part that you also remember that f of g is obviously not the same as g of f. I'm pretty sure you guys know that by now. And f square is not the same as f of x whole square. Although it's very rare that you may be asked to do something like this, but f square basically means that you plug in f and f of x whole square means that you square the function. Okay, अच्छा, अब इसका जो main concept है वो है domain and range का. ठीक है, जिसके लिए I have a certain trick. अच्छा, before we do that, let's do inverse of a function. So how do you find the inverse? You replace f of x with y, you make x the subject, and then you finally replace x with f inverse of x and y with x. So this is very important. that the domain of f of x becomes the range of f inverse of x, and the range of f of x becomes the domain of f inverse of x, okay? And remember, inverse of a function will only exist if the function is a one-to-one function. So wo jo test hai na, horizontal line test, is basically not just a one-to-one or a many-to-one test. It also basically can be used for inverse test. Okay, so sometimes the question will ask you to find out the maximum or the least value for which it's inverse exists. So inverse will only exist if it's a one-to-one function. So this horizontal line test is also an inverse test. Okay, so if the horizontal line cuts it once, that means inverse exists. If it cuts it more than once, that means inverse does not exist. Okay, just for example, I've solved some questions here. Yeah. So, and also remember that f of x and f inverse of x are basically reflection of one another along the line y equals to x. Okay, so you can see that here. So take this point had coordinates 1, 2. Once you take the inverse, it's 2, 1. Take this point has coordinates 2, 5. Inverse has 5, 2. Okay, and you can see that these two are a reflection of one another along the line y equals to x. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा जी. Now, so find f inverse of x for the domain x is greater than or equal to 3. Here's a quadratic. अच्छा, quadratic function का inverse निकालने के लिए you have to first bring it in completed square form. Remember that. Okay, so when you bring it in completed square form, you know, you do all this stuff, you make x the subject. Now, when you make x the subject, you have a plus or a minus. Okay, so we either use plus or minus, but never both. Because if you use both, then it becomes one to many, meaning one input will give you many outputs. Obviously, that's not correct. Acha, up the thing is, how do we decide whether we're going to go with the plus sign or whether we're going to go with the minus sign? Ab dekho, here's the rule. Since the domain is greater than or equal to 3, that means now the range of this inverse function will also be greater than or equal to 3. Now, how would you make sure that the range of this function is greater than or equal to 3? A good idea would be to write it nicely, like this. Now, should you add something to 3 so that the range is greater than or equal to 3, or should you subtract something? Obviously, you should subtract something, or you should add something. So that's why for the answer to part A, since the range of the inverse function must be greater than or equal to 3, we got to have a plus sign after 3. Okay, so a good idea would be to write it like this so that you can decide whether it should be positive or negative. Similarly, if let's say the domain is lesser than or equal to 3, so once you found the inverse, once again, you now have trouble deciding whether to go with the plus or minus. So if you write this nicely, 3 plus minus square root of x plus 4, and you know that this is basically f inverse of x, and now you're sitting, okay, in order to keep you're sitting confused, but you know that you want to keep the range of this function lesser than or equal to 3, so should you go with plus or minus? The answer is obvious that you should definitely subtract something so that the overall range remains less than 3. अच्छा, इसका मैं एक plan B भी देता हूँ अक्सर. इसका plan B क्या है? थोड़ा complicated है, but it works. So in part A, because the domain is greater than 3, you pick a value that's greater than 3. Like for example, we picked 5. You plug in 5. 5 minus 3 is 2. Square of which is 4. 4 minus 4 is 0. So that means if f of 5 is 0, so if you plug in 0 in the inverse function, you should get 5. So when you do plug in 0 in the inverse function, which is right here, you know, you're confused whether to go with plus or minus. So now this is what you get. Now remember, you want the answer to be 5. So should you take the positive square root of 4 and then add 3 to it to get 5, or should you take the negative square root of 4 and then add 3 to it to get 5? The answer is positive. So that means for this domain, greater than or equal to 3, we will take the positive square root, and that's why this is the answer. Now here, for this, take a value that's less than 3. So minus 1 plug in kiya to 12 आया in the regular function, which means that if you plug in 12 in the inverse function, you should get minus 1. So once you plug in 12, this is what you get. Now once again, you need to decide that whether you should take the positive square root of 16, then add 3 to it to get minus 1, or should you take the negative square root of 16, then add 3 to it to get minus 1. And the answer is quite clear that it's going to be the negative square root. Wait, मैंने पानी तो पिया नहीं, ऐसे ही बंद कर दिया. So मज़ा आ रहा है आप लोगों को? Let me enable the chat so you guys can let out some steam. अच्छा, पहले का मैसेज आया, सर फंक्शन क्या होते हैं? तो आई होप यू आर जोकिंग. सर S1 स्ट्रीम टुमारो. S1 में तो बहुत टाइम है यार, S1 की क्या टेंशन है. M1 बोलो तो हाँ समझ आता है, M1 हाँ डेफिनेटली करूँगा, बट S1 में तो बहुत टाइम. सर जैन टॉकिंग अबाउट यू. चले मेरा सलाम दीजिएगा उनको. सर जैन की स्ट्रीम स्टार्ट हो गई है. व्हाट इज़ ही टीचिंग? इफ़ ही इज़ टीचिंग समथिंग important, then please go watch his stream. Sir, you looked very fit. What do you mean you looked very fit? I don't look fit now. Sir, this is so helpful. चलें, I'm glad. दुआ कीजिएगा, बिल्कुल आप लोग भी दुआ कीजिएगा. सर अगर टर्निंग पॉइंट से आगे डोमेन हो तो प्लस, इफ पीछे हो तो माइनस. अच्छा, I don't know if that's a question or a statement. Sir, you're welcome. Achha, we're going to do composite range domain, okay? Composite domain and range, don't worry about that. Sir, when should we sleep? As soon as possible. Get as much sleep as possible. Simple as that. I mean, you do look fit. I think you've been hitting. Yes, thank you. Someone's noticed. Transformation. Transformation pe bhi aa jayenge. Who thought months of work can be summarized in 2 hours? Well, I haven't done summarizing it yet, but yes. Anyway, chale. Sir Zain still reminding to take calculator with you. Yeah, I think सही बोल रहे हैं, because कोई ना कोई कार्टून ऐसा होगा लाजमी देखना. I hope I'm wrong though, but कोई ना कोई कार्टून ऐसा होगा जो कैलकुलेटर ले जाना भूल जाएगा. But you know, I say that hoping that I'm wrong. अच्छा, what to do tomorrow morning? Relax, go over your notes. That's what I would recommend. अच्छा, what's left? अभी ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन करेंगे हम, and we'll do differentiation integration में ज़्यादा टाइम नहीं लगेगा, because conceptually there's not much in differentiation integration. It's just that the questions are lengthy. Sir, ax plus b, the whole thing square plus c in form of quadratics. Please just do one question. Okay, let's see if I can do that. Sir, P1 type questions किधर find करें? What do you mean? Sir, I'm scared, not gonna lie. Like actually, I've practiced now, but I can't help be scared. Tips. अच्छा, एक वीडियो है I've made, वो जो कि इंशाल्लाह आ जाएगी as soon as I'm done with this stream. You guys can watch it. ठीक है, that will help. Stream होगी another hour or so, inshallah. ठीक है, so let's resume. अच्छा, now we're doing what? We are, let's jump to, अच्छा जैसे for example ये question आ गया. So this question says, a function g, so we've made the sketch, a function g is defined by, it's the same as this, for x is greater than or equal to 0, where is a constant, state the largest value of a, for which g has an inverse. So this function will have an inverse for as long as it's a 1-to-1. So they go 1-to-1, 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 1-to-1. From this point onwards, it's going to be many-to-1, many-to-1, many-to-1. Why? Because remember, there are multiple ways of identifying a 1-to-1 function from a many-to-1 function. A horizontal line is cutting it twice. So that means if I just keep this part of the function, for this part of the function, the horizontal line will only cut it once. So it's a 1-to-1 function. Or you can see this, that it's decreasing, 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 decreasing. From this point onwards, it's increasing. So that means for as long as it's only decreasing, it's a 1-to-1 function. Okay, so what's the greatest value of a? 90. So up until 90, it's a 1-to-1 function. Okay, now formation of composite function. This is a concept that bothers a lot of students. Now there's a simple trick for it, and here it is. A composite function can only be formed if the range of the inner function is equal to the domain of the outer function. So remember this rule, redo. Range inner, domain outer. Fg can only exist if the range of g is equal to the domain of f. And that makes sense also. If you think about it, if you're plugging in function g and function f, then the range of g is basically now going to be the domain of f. Similarly, if you're finding g of f, that means the range of f will now be equal to the domain of g. Okay, so this is how you will solve these questions. So for example, here you have a question, and it's saying, okay, find the domain of g for which g of f exists. So that means the range of g will be equal to the domain, or range of f, sorry, will be equal to the domain of g. Redo. This is the inner function, this is the outer function. Range of the inner function equals to the domain of the outer function. So let's find out the range of f. So you find out the range of f. Here it is. F of 4 is equals to 4. You plug in 4. You plug in 6. So this is the range of f. So this is now the domain of G for which the composite function will exist. Okay, I think this is a past paper question only. When a past papers में से निकाला है इस तरह ये question. And that is because the function that you're plugging into G is f, so whatever is the range of f should now be the domain of G for this function to exist. Simple as that. Okay, so here for example, this is function f, this is function g. State the largest possible value of a for the composition of fg to be defined. So identify the inner and outer function. This is the inner function, this is the outer function. Find the range of the inner function. So how will you find out the range of this? Simply plug in this. Okay, so 2k minus 3, it's an upward sloping line, so that means its range will be lesser than or equal to 2k minus 3. Equate the range of the inner function to the domain of the outer function. So 2k minus 3 is basically equal to minus 4, and then solve, and there you go, this is what you get. अच्छा ये minus 4 कहाँ से आया? ये minus 4 यहाँ से आया. Okay, so range of the inner function 2k minus 3 equated to the domain of the outer function, which is f, so that's 4. Solve this. 2k is equals to minus 1, k is equals to minus 1 upon 2. This is the largest value which will allow the composite function to be formed. Simple. Here also same concept. Okay, now this is slightly different, I think. Yeah, चलो देख लेते हैं. With k now taking the value of 1, find the largest possible value of constant p, which allows the composite function fg to be formed. Find an expression fg of x when this composite function, whenever this composite function exists. So the function is fg of x. So that means g is the inner function, f is the outer function. So you find out the range of g. How will you find out the range of g? You will plug in p. So p plus 3. This is the range. What's the domain of f? The question said that k is 1, so that means it's lesser than or equal to 1. So you take the range, you set it equal to the domain. So this is the range, you set it equal to lesser than or equal to minus 1. That means p is lesser than or equal to 1. So p is lesser than or equal to minus 2. So this is the largest value of p. Or basically this is the largest value of p, which allows the composite function to be formed. And then you find out fg of x. वो तो कोई भी कर सकता है. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, once again, here also you're supposed to find out the range. So remember to get friendly with the function. The domain is x is greater than 2. So you plug in 2, you get 0. You plug in infinity, you get 1. So that means the range is between 0 and 1. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब आ जाते हैं transformation पे. Another pain point. So you have translation. This is what horizontal translation looks like. You have vertical. This is what vertical translation looks like. You have stretch. We'll do this in detail, don't worry. Parallel to the y-axis, so you can see that the height has increased after you've stretched it. And then you have horizontal stretch, which is parallel to the x-axis, so you can see that the function has basically shrunk, and this is what it is now. Okay, we'll do this in detail. Abhi hum sirf review kar rahe hain what they look like. Reflection along the x-axis. This is reflection along the x-axis. This is reflection along the y-axis. There you go. Okay. Then you have translation. So translation is defined. Now we're reviewing translation in detail. So this is how it's defined. If a is positive, the function moves to the right. If a is negative, the function moves to the left. Okay. B, if it's positive, the function moves up. If it's negative, the function moves down. Simple as that. अच्छा, ये कुछ basic examples हैं, इनको skip करते हैं. अच्छा, इनको देख लें ज़रा. ये x square है. If you do x square plus 2, the function will move vertically up. If you do x square minus 1, the function will move vertically down. And what's the column vector? Here, because there is no change in x, so it's 0, minus 1. Here, because there is a change in no change in x and change in y, so 0, 2. So the graph of y is equals to f of x plus minus a is a translation of y is equals to f of x by a vector 0 plus minus a. Okay, so if this is plus, ये भी plus होगा. If this is minus, ये भी minus होगा. क्यों? Why am I saying this? Because x में उल्टा होता है. In x, it's the opposite. So when you subtract 2, notice that the graph in blue has moved 2 units towards the right. When you add 1, notice that the graph has moved towards the left. So that means when you subtract something from x, the graph moves towards the right. When you add something in x, the graph moves towards the left. Okay, so in x, it's the opposite. Now, I would strongly suggest that you guys go over my notes, okay? And especially when it comes to transformations, in the end, I've given a summary of it. Okay, I've shown what happens to the equation, what does the vector look like, how do you describe it, and also very importantly, what happens to the point. So if you add something to the entire function, it gets added to every y value. If you subtract something from the entire function, it gets subtracted from every y value. When you subtract something from x, that value gets added to every x coordinate. When you add something in x, because the function moves towards the left, so from every x coordinate, that value gets subtracted. Okay? So this is an example, fairly easy. Okay. Acha, functions transformation pe bhi I've done 2 detailed streams. I would strongly encourage you guys to check that out. Acha, also remember that in order to be able to better identify what is the transformation in quadratic functions, it's best to bring it in completed square form. कुछ मैंने आगे example questions किए हुए हैं जिसमें मैंने वो चीज़ explain की हुई है. Or maybe you can watch the past paper stream that I've done for functions transformation to understand that. So let's quickly go over reflection. If you want to reflect something along the x-axis, which means the equation is y equals to 0, you multiply the entire equation by minus. And there you go. This is what you get. So the graph of y equals to minus f of x is a reflection of y equals to f of x along the x-axis or the line y equals to 0. Note, minus f of x means that the entire equation gets multiplied by minus 1. If you want to reflect it along the y-axis, you multiply x by minus. When you multiply x by minus, all negative values of x become positive and the function gets reflected. Y equals to minus f of x is a reflection of y is equals to f of x along the y-axis or the line x equals to 0. Note, x gets replaced by minus x. Invariant point that remains unchanged after the transformation, ये usually होते हैं line of reflection पे basically. अच्छा, इसकी भी description देख लो कि if you multiply the entire equation by minus, it's a reflection along the x-axis or the y equals to 0 and the sign of every y coordinate changes. If you multiply x by minus, it's a reflection along y-axis or the sign of the x coordinate changes. ठीक है? Okay, then some examples. I would strongly suggest that you guys watch the stream of functions in which I've covered this. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब आ जाते हैं stretch पे. Another pain point. So remember, x के साथ सब उल्टा होता है. So notice here that when we have y equals to sine 2x, what's happened is that every x, even though in the equation we're multiplying by 2, but what's happened is that every point has actually gotten divided by 2. And what happens to the point is how we decide the stretch factor or the scale factor. So because every point is getting divided by 2, so we say that the scale factor is half. Okay? Okay, and remember that whenever there is a horizontal stretch, the width will change it. Either it will get narrower or it will get wider. How do I know that there is a horizontal stretch? Either the graph will get narrower or the graph will get wider. But the height remains the same. Okay? So the graph of y is equals to f of ax is a stretch with factor 1 upon a in the x direction. F of ax means divide all values of x by a while y values remain the same. Okay, so if you have f of ax, that means all the x values will be divided by a. Like for example, if it's 2, all x values, notice that they get divided by 2 while y coordinate remains the same. So for example, f of 3x is a stretch with factor 1 upon 3 in the x direction. F of half x is a stretch with factor 2. Now, how did we come up with the stretch factor? 1 divided by half. Okay, 1 divided by the coefficient of x, which is equal to 2. And that means now every point will now be doubled. ठीक है, हर point क्या होगा? हर point जो है वो भी double हो जाएगा. Okay, now every single value of x. अच्छा, ये I think उसी की explanation है. ठीक है. Okay, now vertical stretch. In vertical stretch, remember the height changes. Either it gets taller or shorter, but the width remains the same. Achha, vertical stretch is pretty straightforward. If let's say you multiply 8 by 2, so all the y values you can see are going to double while the x values remain the same. Okay, so a of f of x, where a is a constant, means that that you multiply all the y values with a while the x values stay the same. Okay, so 3 times f of x is a stretch factor with 3 in the y direction. Half times f of x is a stretch factor half in the y direction. Or you can also say parallel to the y-axis. That's also totally acceptable. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा. Now, okay. So here is a table which will help you understand how it works. So if let's say you have y is equals to f of ax, this is a stretch in the x direction, the stretch factor is 1 upon a, and what happens to the point is that the point gets divided. So for example, if this is 2, every point gets divided by 2. If this is half, every point gets divided by half, which means every point will then be doubled. Okay, so agar ye half x hota, that means every point, if there is a point 3, that point will also be get divided by half, and that point will then double. Okay, how do you write down the stretch factor? The stretch factor is basically equal to 1 upon the coefficient of x. So for example, if this was half, the stretch factor would be 1 upon half, which is equal to 2. So 2 would be the stretch factor. Y में things are pretty straightforward, nothing to worry about. Okay, then some examples that you guys should go over. अच्छा जी. अच्छा, अब ये देख लें, combined transformation, another pain point. Remember the simple rule that if the combined transformation, doesn't matter how many they are, whether they're 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, although ऐसा नहीं होगा, but if they are vertical, which means it could be a vertical stretch, it could be a vertical translation, could be a reflection along the x-axis. These are all examples of vertical transformations. So what we do is we follow BODMAS. Simple as that. Okay, so for example, अगर हमें f of x को 3 times f of x plus 2 बनाना है तो किस sequence में transform करना चाहिए? मैंने यहाँ पे करके दिखाया हुआ है. If I first stretch it, so that means f of x becomes 3 times f of x. If I then translate it, that means I add 2 in the end. So now this becomes y is equals to 3 times f of x plus 2. We achieve what we wanted. If, however, I first translate it, so this is what we get. We get f of x plus 2. But then if we stretch it in the y direction with scale factor 3, remember the entire equation gets multiplied by 3 and you get 3 times f of x plus 6, which is not what you wanted. So that means the rule is that you follow BODMAS. If, however, they are both horizontal, you follow opposite of BODMAS. Okay, अब कोई इसको Sam Dob भी बोलता है, you can do that, but it's basically opposite of BODMAS. So for example, if you want to turn f of x into f of 2x minus 4, so let's apply both ways. First, let's stretch it in the x direction with scale factor half. So that means this is what it becomes. Then we translate. Now remember, translating it with 4, 0 means that we subtract 4 from x. So when you subtract 4 from x, what happens is this becomes 2x minus 8. Why? Because you change x to x minus 4, then when you expand, you don't get the desired result. अच्छा, अब इसमें एक way out भी है, ठीक है? एक way out भी है, एक alternate method भी है, जो कि अभी मैं आप लोगों को बताऊंगा. I know some of you may be thinking that how about we take 2 common and then do it. So I'll talk about that also. अच्छा, if however, let's say I first translate it and then I stretch it. Let's see what happens. So if I translate it, that means, or 4 units towards the right, that means I have to subtract 4 from x. Then if I stretch it with scale factor half, that means I need to change x to 2, okay, or divide the coefficient of x by the stretch factor, so it becomes 2, and then we achieve the desired result. ठीक है? अच्छा, लेकिन इसमें एक third possibility भी है. So long story short, if they're both both horizontal, you follow opposite of BODMAS. अच्छा, also, if let's say you have horizontal and vertical, so as far as the horizontal transformations are concerned, you follow opposite of BODMAS. But as far as the vertical transformation is concerned, you can put that in any order. Okay, so if let's say there is stretch, there is translation, or horizontal translation, and so, एक minute. Let's say there is a vertical stretch, a horizontal stretch, and horizontal translation. So जो vertical stretch है, आप उसको कहीं भी डाल सकते हैं, ठीक है? Because there's only one vertical translation, you can fit that anywhere. But as far as the multiple horizontal transformations that you have, for that you will follow opposite of BODMAS. Okay? So now there's an alternative way to do this also. Okay, so there's a third way, in which what you can do is, you can take 2 common. अक्सर आप लोगों ने देखा होगा कि past papers में उन्होंने multiple methods दिए हुए होते हैं, ठीक है? अब the thing is, how is it that we are going to achieve this? ठीक है, हम इसको कैसे achieve करेंगे? हम इसको पता है, अब ये थोड़ा हो सकता है आप लोगों को confusing लगे, but because there is a bracket here, Okay, so we will first stretch it with scale factor 2. So for example, if you have y is equals to f of x, scale factor half, and then you stretch it with scale factor half in the x direction. So what do you get? You get 2x. Okay? So you get basically f of 2x. And then the other transformation that you can do is that you can translate it, but this time what will happen is that the column vector will be slightly different. The column vector will be 2, 0 instead of 4, 0. And then when you do that, notice what happens. 2 remains as it is, and in place of x, you get x minus 2. ठीक है, लेकिन ये मैं आप लोगों को बता रहा हूँ so that when you look at the marking scheme, you know exactly why this is or what this is for, but this will make things complicated. My suggestion to you is this, that whenever they're both horizontal, you follow opposite of part mass. ठीक है? अच्छा, this is a summary. You can take a screenshot of it if you like. This basically contains all the 3 transformations that we have: stretch, translation, and reflection. I'll enable the chat so you guys can let out some steam if needed, and then we'll continue. Silly mistakes का देखो मैंने आप लोगों को बताया, just slow down, use your calculator to check whatever it is that you can. And new method wrong? How is that wrong? Use your calculator to check whatever you can. And a small advice that people find it funny, but it's important, and that is just read it out loud. Okay, not loud enough that आपको उठा के बाहर निकाल दें, ठीक है, but loud enough so that only you can hear it. Simple as that. अच्छा, AS Math की एक final message की वीडियो अपलोड हो गई है, तो I want you guys to watch it once you're done with this. ठीक है, उसमें मैंने कुछ important बातें बताई हैं, so make sure to go over it. So we'll go through chain rule. Yeah, I will go over that. So sir, we can start with horizontal and then vertical. Yeah, you can do that. Stream will end inshallah. Oh, it's 10:30. Another 30 minutes. Stream will end inshallah. How do you do all this alone? What do you mean? Yeah, only differentiation and integration is left. Sir, Zain dua karwa ke light chali gayi. I don't know what that means. Blue pen, you can use whatever method. New method ulta ho gaya. देखो ulta तो हो गया लेकिन हमारा result तो आ गया ना. ठीक है, which is why I said that this, you might find this a little confusing. So which is why I suggest that you abandon this, but I did it to validate so that you guys don't get confused. ठीक है, अब आप ये कर लें. क्या करवानी है इज्तिमाई दुआ बताएं. Yes, this will be uploaded after the stream ends, don't worry. अभी भी आप लोग पूछ रहे हैं, when was the last time there was a stream that was not uploaded? Tell me. When was the last time there was a stream that was not uploaded? Sir, break. बेटा किस बात की break? अभी बस हम wrap up करें. Differentiation, integration रह गया, then we're wrapping up. Can I use a pink pen? Please don't use a pink pen. Why would you want to do that? Says stream is literally auto-uploaded chat. Yeah, I don't know. फिर भी हर दफ़ा, every time I stream, there's always someone asking, sir, will the stream be uploaded? Sir, can you please upload the stream later so we can watch it later? Bhai, every stream is uploaded. Unless I'm streaming something illegal, which obviously I don't plan to. So, ऐसी कोई बात नहीं है. Sir, Zain क्या तोहफा आ गया. अच्छा खैर, anyway. Sir, even after studying like the whole year, it feels like I know nothing. That is normal. आपको लग रहा होता है कि आप बोल रहे हैं, but the concepts are there. ऐसा नहीं हो सकता. I mean, technically speaking, it's not possible that you know all the that you've studied so hard and then all of a sudden, it's just that you're so overwhelmed, you're feeling that anxiety, which is why you think that you're forgetting everything, but ऐसा नहीं होता. Okay, so let's resume. And would strongly suggest that you guys watch the function stream that I've done, the transformation. Now we're left with differentiation and integration. Let's do that. And then tata bye-bye. So the concepts to cover. Finding dy by dx, we need to learn how to differentiate composite function. We need to learn how to differentiate, walaikum salam, mera bhi salam dijiyega unko. You need to learn how to differentiate power functions. We need to learn how to differentiate composite functions. Okay, you need to learn how to find gradient. You need to learn how to find out equation of tangent and normal, increasing function, decreasing function, stationary point, and nature and rates of change. Okay, so first of all, how do you find out what exactly is the whole purpose of differentiation? Differentiation ka purpose sirf ek hi hota hai, yaad rakho, and that is to find out the rate of change of one variable with respect to another. Okay, that's the only purpose of differentiation. And you can use that for multiple reasons. You can use that for gradient, you can use that for rates of change, you can use that for stationary values. For so many things you can use that. Okay, so that's the purpose of differentiation. Now earlier we used to find out the gradient by drawing a tangent. Differentiation, the problem with that method is that it's an estimate, it takes a lot of time. Differentiation is an algebraic approach. Like for example, two equations can be solved simultaneously by either drawing them or you can solve them using substitution and elimination. Obviously substitution and elimination, the algebraic methods give you the more accurate answer. ठीक है? अच्छा, अब किसी भी function का gradient निकालने के लिए at a certain point what you do is you differentiate. Once you've differentiated, you plug in the value of x. Okay, once you differentiate, you get either dy by dx or you call it f prime of x, which is basically known as gradient function. Then you plug in the x coordinate in dy by dx or f prime of x, and what you get is basically the gradient of tangent to the curve at the relevant point. Okay, now how to differentiate? If you have a power function, this is how you differentiate. You multiply the power by the coefficient and you take one away from the power. This is the general rule. Okay, now something that I always recommend students to do is that if a question is complex, like for example, if it's like this, then make a differentiation ready. Move it into the numerator so that the power is also in the numerator, and then you can differentiate it. Okay, so a lot of times you will come across questions where you will have to first do this step. Like for example, you may have something like 1 upon x minus 1. Now don't go ahead and differentiate this immediately. First write it nicely, 1 into x minus 1 to the power minus 1, and then differentiate it. Okay, so I like to call this step making it differentiation ready. Okay, so like for example this, make a differentiation ready by moving x to the numerator. Make this differentiation ready by simplifying. Make this differentiation ready by moving x to the numerator. Okay, and then there are different examples. Achha, this, if you want to differentiate, अच्छा इसमें अक्सर ऐसा होगा that the question will first make you write it down in a certain way and then will make you differentiate, okay? But if it doesn't, nothing to worry about. You can do that yourself. Separate the x, write it separately with 2x, write it separately with minus 5, and you can then differentiate it. There you go. Okay, if you want to find out the gradient of the curve at a certain point, differentiate it, plug in the value of x, you will get the gradient of the curve, which is basically the gradient of the tangent at that point. Okay? Now, find the gradient of the curve at the point where the curve crosses the y-axis. Just a fancy way of saying find out the gradient of the curve at the point where x equals to 0. Differentiate, plug in x equals to 0. Okay, here, for example, you're given the curve, equation of the curve, and you're given the gradient. And read the question, coordinates of the point. So that means there's got to be more than one point. So learn to take hints from the question. So you differentiate, you equate it to the gradient, and then you find out the x value. To find out the y value, you plug in the x values back into the equation to get the y value. Now, how do you differentiate composite functions? There's a rule for that. Power gets multiplied by the constant outside the bracket. You take one away from the power, you multiply by the differential of the expression inside the bracket. Like for example, if you want to differentiate this, power will be multiplied by 4, that's 16. We take one away from the power, that's 3. And then we multiply it by the differential of 3x minus 1, which is equal to 3. Okay, and then the whole pattern continues. So if you have y is equals to square root of 2x minus 1, half gets multiplied. You take one away from the power, that's minus half. Then you multiply it by the differential of the expression inside the bracket, which is 2. And then also simplify, either leave it like this or write it like this. We write it like this so that we can plug in values easily. Okay, so here also 3 gets multiplied, take one away from the power, multiplied by the differential of x squared plus 4x, which is 2x plus 4, and that's the answer. That's a finding gradient, you differentiate, you plug in the value, simple as that. Now equation of tangent and normal, it's a step-by-step procedure. You find dy by dx by differentiating the equation of the curve. You plug in x equals to x1 in dy by dx to find the tangent. Now remember, these are the two key ingredients that you need in order to find out the equation of a straight line. So when you differentiate, you plug in x, you get the gradient of tangent. Now you need a point. How will you get the point? you will plug in the x coordinate into the equation of the curve, you will get the corresponding y value, and that will complete the point, meaning you will have the x and the y coordinate, and then you will use this form to find out the equation of tangent. But if it's the equation of normal, the point will remain the same. The only thing that will change is the gradient. The gradient, however, will now be taken as the negative reciprocal. ठीक हो गया? Okay, now, this is an example. You guys can go over it. The step-by-step procedure remains the same. Okay, now, if the question says find the coordinates of the point at which the normal meets the curve again, so simplify and solve the equation of the normal simultaneously with the curve. One point will be the same as the one given in the question. Like, for example, here, we got -2, so we ignored that. We wanted a new point, so that's this, and then you find out the y coordinate, and this is what you get. Okay. The normal to the curve at P crosses the x-axis at Q. Find out the equation of normal by differentiating, taking the negative reciprocal, plugging in the value of x, taking the negative reciprocal of the gradient, using the point. Find the equation. Achha, also, ek cheez yaad rakho, if the question is asking you to just find the equation and the question hasn't specified as to what form it is you should give the equation, then you can leave it like this. Okay, this is good enough. Okay, just something that you can use to save some time. And then the question says that the normal to the curve at P crosses the x-axis at Q, so simply plug in y as 0, you'll get the answer. Okay, then some questions. Equation of normal at R, differentiate. R is the point where y is 0, so you will first find out the x coordinate. Achha, also, dekho, ek cheez main aap logon ko sikaunga, and I noticed that a lot of you don't pay attention to it, that always make sense of your answer. So for example, here, when you're finding out the equation of normal at R, so what do you expect the gradient to be? Obviously, you expect the gradient to be positive. Okay? So if the gradient is normal at P, you expect the gradient to be positive. So when you're solving, keep your eyes and ears open and see whether you are getting a positive gradient or not. Because maybe it is that you make an error, and because of that error, you don't end up getting a positive gradient, you end up getting a negative gradient, which means that you have done something wrong. Okay? So make sense of your answer. ये ना हो कि आप लोग जो है वो बस आंखें बंद करके और आंखें दिमाग सब बंद करके आप solve करें. ठीक है? So that's not a good idea. Okay. Now, अच्छा, let's skip this. Increasing decreasing function. Once again, a pain point. अब देखो function increase कब होता है? First of all, function stationary कब होता है? Stationary जब होता है जब tangent horizontal होता है. A function is increasing when the tangent is upward sloping. A function is decreasing when a tangent is downward sloping. Okay, like for example, this is a decreasing function. At this point, it's stationary. From this point onwards, it's an increasing function. So if you're asked to find, if you're given decreasing function, set dy by dx less than 0. If it's stationary, dy by dx equals to 0. If it's increasing, dy by dx greater than 0. Simple as that. So if the question says find the set of values of x for which f is decreasing, set it less than 0, solve like you would solve any other inequality. It's possible that you may end up with a quadratic inequality, so solve a quadratic inequality, and there you go, this is the answer. So here I would like to point something out, that even though that the answer that we're getting by solving this is x is less than 5 upon 2, but that's not the final answer, this is what the final answer is. Why? Because initially there was a certain domain mentioned in the question, so we have to keep that in mind also. That is greater than half and less than 5 upon 2. I think there was a question similar to this in the second mock also. So check that out. So now what do you do when you have to determine whether it's an increasing or a decreasing function? In that case, you find dy by dx and then you look for patterns. So for example, here, I think we've done this question. This will always be a decreasing function. Why? Because 3x plus 2, the whole thing square, will always be positive. What happens when you divide -3 by it? So the overall value of this is negative. Okay, so iski overall value aa gayi negative. Up 2x mein, what's the value that you're plugging in always? You're always plugging in a value that's less than -1. So that means this will also be negative. So what's negative plus negative? That's also negative. Okay, so the answer will be dy by dx or f prime of x will always be less than 0. So therefore, it's a negative. It's a decreasing function. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, अब आ जाते हैं stationary point. Stationary point कैसे निकालते हैं? You differentiate, you set it equal to 0. Okay, when you differentiate and you set it equal to 0, you solve the x coordinates of the stationary point. Then you plug in the x coordinates of the stationary point into the equation of the curve to find the y coordinates. It could be 1, it could be more than 1. So the number of x coordinates that you will have the same number of y coordinates also. How do you find out the nature? You double differentiate. once you double differentiate, there are two possibilities. Either you get a constant. So if the constant is negative, it's maximum. If the constant is positive, it's minimum. Or you get the double derivative in terms of x. If it's in terms of x, you plug in the x coordinates of the turning point. Once again, it will be a constant. If it's negative, it's maximum. If it's positive, it's minimum. Okay? So some example questions that you guys can go over. I did two streams on differentiation, 2 on integration. Make sure to check that out. Now we're talking about practical applications or stationary slash maximum slash minimum value. In questions like these, there will always be a certain shape. You may be given some information about that shape, like for example, volume or something, or area, and you will be asked to make one variable, express one variable in terms of other. Like for example, here, with the help of area, we're asked to express h in terms of x. Okay, when you do that, this is what you get. Achha. Now we're supposed to show that volume is equal to this, and notice that this is only in terms of x. Technically, if you think about it, this is what the volume of this shape is going to be, x into h. But because we've already expressed h in terms of x, we'll plug it in here and we'll bring it equal to what the question wants. Achha, God forbid, if let's say you're unable to do this part, you're unable to do this part, you can still do this part. Why? Because here the question is asking you to find out the stationary value of v. That means find dv by dx, set it equal to 0, solve for x, and because the question is asking for a stationary value of v, plug in that value of x back into the equation. So here's the value of x. I plugged in that value back into the equation of v, and we've gotten the stationary value of v, and then double differentiate to see what you get. So since it's minus 3x, that means it's negative, meaning that it will always be maximum. Okay, the only thing that will change in this question is the shape that you're dealing with, but the procedure remains the same. If it's asking you for a stationary value, so you differentiate. Achha, the question is, what is it that you will differentiate with respect to? So notice question में अक्सर given होता है कि जैसे for example यहाँ पे given that x can vary, so that means you will differentiate v with respect to x. Okay, that's how it works. अच्छा, कुछ इसके मुश्किल questions हैं. I think मैंने differentiation की stream में कराए हुए हैं. Make sure to go over that and make sure to revise all the formulas that you do in O levels. Okay, prism, volume, surface area, all the O level related formulas. Make sure to revise that also. Achha, then let's go to rates of change. Rates of change, huh? Okay. So remember, dy by dx is basically rate of change of y with respect to x. dr upon dt is the rate of change of radius with respect to time. dv upon dt, rate of change of volume with respect to time. dh upon dt, rate of change of height with respect to time. d upon dt is rate of change of area with respect to time. Now, for rates of change, remember the 3W approach. Okay, we use the 3W approach. Very simple. What is given, what do you want, when do you want it? So you're given that this radius, the circle has radius a and area a. The radius is increasing at a rate of 0.1 centimeter per second. So this is what's given. Since it's the rate of change of radius, that means it's dr upon dt. So this is what's given. What do you want? You want the rate of increase of a. When do you want it? You want it when r is equals to 4. अच्छा, अब chain rule कैसे बनाएं? Chain rule बनाने का तरीका देख लो. Chain rule बनाने का तरीका बहुत simple है. ठीक है, I'll do it here. So for example, you want dA by dt. So the numerator of the first fraction will be equal to the numerator of what you want. The denominator of the second fraction will be equal to the denominator of what you want. Now here and here, you will have something that's number one, common and also relevant. Okay, meaning that whatever it is that you put here, you'll put the same thing here, but it should be relevant to the question. Meaning I can't just plug in dx and dx. Okay, although this will give me dA by d. Sorry, I just realized this is dt, not dr. This is dt. Okay, so I can put dx by dx, but the question is, where will I get dx from? So what is common? What is it that makes the most sense? dr is what makes the most sense. So you already have dr upon dt, but the question is, where will you get dA by dr? So focus on the letters a and r. That means if I can express a in terms of r, which I can since it's a circle, which is pi r squared, that means if I differentiate it with respect to r, I will get 2 by r. So this is what we were looking for. Now we will use the same value of r that we were given, plug it into the equation, and we will have dA by dr. Okay, that's the approach that you will use in any rates of change question. So for example, here, it's a past paper question. The volume of a spherical balloon is increasing at a rate of 50 centimeter cube per second. So that's dV upon dt. This is what's given, W number 1. Find the rate of increase of radius. So this is what you want. When the radius is 10, this is when you want it. So dr upon dt, numerator of the first fraction equal to dr, denominator of the second fraction equal to dt. Here and here, we'll have something that's common and also relevant. So the only thing that makes sense is dv. Now focus on these two letters here. These are r and v. So can I express r in terms of v or maybe v in terms of r? Yes, we can. That's basically the volume of a sphere. Differentiated to get dv upon dr. Plug in the value of r to get the value of dv upon dr. But since this is dr upon dv, we'll take the reciprocal. Okay, and that's how every single question basically works. Okay, now let me enable the chat. There you go. Pani bhi khatam. Sir, at which college do you teach? I don't teach at any college. I don't teach at any institute. I just teach online. Probably the best decision I made. Thank you, Ian. I appreciate it. सर सर्कुलर मेजर कितने मार्क्स का आता है? लगता है आप लोगों ने सब टाइप करके तैयार रखा होता है कि जैसे ही चैट खुलेगी you're just gonna send this. सर चेन रूल क्वेश्चंस थोड़े और. But I just want to wrap things up because I don't want to keep you guys up for too long. So I'm just gonna do integration and that's it. सर हालात ख़राब हो रहे हैं किसके बेटा, मुल्क के या आपके खुद के? सीकेंट लाइन कॉन्सेप्ट ये कहाँ से आ गया? पेट सर इंटीग्रेशन डिटेल में करवाएगा? अगर डिटेल में देखो, अगर डिटेल में करना है तो फिर वो स्ट्रीम देख लो, ठीक है? Yeah, I know, I'm just contradicting myself, you're right. So which is why I'm just going to wrap things up for integration and then that's it, go to sleep. Sir, give 10-minute break for dinner. But integration kar lo, phir eat as much as you like. Okay. Dinner is time pe at 11? You guys have dinner so late? Sir, mensuration is not in our syllabus. Ye kaun aa gaya bhai? सर फंक्शन का क्वेश्चन कितने बेटा मुझे नहीं पता कितने मार्क्स का आएगा, ठीक है? मैं पेपर देखा नहीं है, अगर देखा होता मैं तब भी नहीं बताता. Because just like you guys are counting on, you guys should be counting on your own preparation, on your own concepts. Just like that, I should also count on my own teaching rather than what is coming in the paper. Sir, बेटा mensuration is okay. I hope आपको O-level student now. If you're an AS Math student, then all the formulas of mensuration are part of your syllabus. Simple. 65 to 70 marks good, depends on the threshold. Anyway, so let's start. So plan for yearlies right now and tomorrow. No, please don't do any yearly, okay? Kya ho gaya bhai? Superman t-shirt come back when? Let's see. What do I do for a living? What do you think I do for a living? So I'm getting 38, 39 marks. Jane. Inshallah, the threshold will be low enough for you to get a good grade. Okay, so let's start. This is integration. Let's wrap things up. So what are the concepts? Integration applied to dy by dx to find the equation of the curve. Integration applied to a curve to find area. Remember something, you can use your calculator to check the answer. Integration applied to curve to find volume, that is solids of revolution, and indefinite integral. इसके आगे मैंने recording क्यों लिखा हुआ है? Probably because I gave recording to my students. Anyway, so wait. Equation of the curve. Here's the equation of the curve. You integrate the equation of the curve to find the area under the curve, and you integrate it to find volume generated. Obviously, you square it also. Okay, so this is a flowchart kind of a thing. You differentiate the equation of the curve to find dy by dx, and dy by dx can be used to find out the equation of tangent, normal, stationary value. Then once you have the stationary value, differentiate it again to find out nature. Okay. However, if you have dy by dx, you integrate it to come back to the equation of the curve. Okay. Achha, what are the rules of integrations? you add 1 to the power, divide by the new power. Simple as that. So if you have 4x squared, you add 1 to the power, so it becomes 4x cubed, and then you divide by the new power, which is 3. You add 1 to the power, so it becomes 2x squared, divide by the new power. There you go. Once again, make this integration ready, move the power to the numerator, so you can add 1 to it easily, divide by the new power, and this is what you get. Okay, remember there's always a plus c. Now is not the time to understand kiski piche kya story hai. So if you have a question like this, once again, remember to make it integration ready. That's what I like to call it. Add 1 to the power half. Now, if you're dealing with power that is in fractions, please use your calculator. No need to take unnecessary risks. You're not going to get any extra benefit out of it. Okay? So when you have a question like this, it's best to separate the denominator, write it with every term of the numerator separately, and then integrate. ठीक हो गया, some basic integration practice that I did. A curve is such that, okay, now how do you use the dy by dx to find the equation of the curve? Step 1, integrate dy by dx to find y in terms of x and c. Why? Because every time you integrate and you don't do it within limits, you will have a plus c. So 2x cubed upon 3 minus 5x plus c. Now to find out the value of c, you need a point. Just like if you're doing coordinate geometry and you find out the equation of a line, which is in the form of y equals to mx plus c, you found the gradient. Now in order to find out the value of c, you need a point through which the line is passing through. Here also, you need a point through which the curve is passing. You're given that, that's 3, 8. You plug in that point, you find out the value of c, and that's 5. And then you complete the equation of the curve with the value of c, and that's it. So another example, write it nicely first, integrate it. You will have plus c, and then you will plug in this point to find out the value of c. So how do you integrate composite functions? Once again, you add 1 to the power, divide by the new power, and you also divide by the differential of the expression inside the bracket. In integration, you would multiply. In differentiation, you would multiply. In integration, you divide. Okay? So for example, here, you add 1 to the power, you divide by the new power, and then you also divide by the differential of 2x plus 5, which is 2. Here also, you first write it nicely. You add 1 to the power, divide by the new power, and you also divide. Now, when you're dividing it again, that means the two denominators get multiplied. So you divide it by this, and then use your calculator to simplify. Simple as that. Here also, write it nicely, move it in the numerator, make it integration ready, add 1 to the power, divide by the new power, also divide by the differential of the expression inside the bracket. There you go. Some examples following the same concept. Once again, some examples following the same concept. Now, integration to find area under the curve. Now, remember, there are 4 things that you take into account when integrating within limits. What it is with respect to that you're integrating, what curve it is that you're integrating, the upper limit, the lower limit. And these 4 things basically serve as boundaries. If you're integrating with respect to x, that means one boundary x. The lower limit is the other boundary. The upper limit is the other boundary. The curve is the upper boundary. So whatever it is that's between these 4 things, you get that area. Simple as that. ठीक है? अच्छा, हम normally इसको in area under the curve बोलते हैं, but it's not always under the curve. It's basically area between the curve and the x-axis. क्यों? क्योंकि sometimes the curve is below the x-axis. And that, when you find out the area, you get it in minus, which basically means your answer is trying to tell you that this is basically below the x-axis, but because we're giving area, we don't write it with the minus sign. Okay, so for example here, pretty straightforward question, you integrate it within the limits 0 and 4, you get the answer. Now this also can be done in your calculator, I'll show you that, and that is this. So you type the equation of the curve. Okay, what's that? That's basically equation of the curve. Okay, you don't have to integrate it. Your calculator will do that for you. X cubed minus 8 x square. Okay, and then plus 16x. So, oops, 8x square plus 16x. You type the limits. The limits are 0 and 4. And there you go, 64 upon 3, that's exactly what we got. But you're going to use this to check your answer. You have to show all your working. Achha, यहाँ पे something interesting will happen. When you integrate the curve within the limit 0 and 5, so remember the 4 boundaries. What are the 4 boundaries? The upper limit, here is one boundary. Okay, there's no line to be drawn here. So this point can be considered as a boundary. 0, another boundary, no line to be drawn here. X-axis another boundary, the curve another boundary. So you find out the area that's bounded between these, and when you solve, you get a negative answer. Okay, now this negative is trying to tell you that if area is below the x-axis, then the answer after applying limits will be negative. But you will give it as positive because you know exactly what it is that you want. The calculator doesn't. अच्छा, अब ये concept है जो कि इतना frequently test नहीं होता, but if you haven't done it, it's okay. If you've done, I'll just go over it. No need to sit down and learn this concept right now. So basically, if the area, okay, volume में तो ये होता है, area में इतना नहीं होता है. If let's say the area is between the curve and the y-axis and the limits are also y values, then what you can do is, in order to find the area, okay, I've made an error myself. In order to find the area bounded by the curve, y is equals to f of x, y equals to a, y equals to b, and the y-axis, we integrate x with respect to y using y equals to a and y equals to b as the limits. So what we'll do is, क्योंकि हमें y को boundary बनाना है, so we'll have to integrate with respect to y. The curve, the upper limit of y, the lower limit of y, and the y-axis. So we'll make x the subject, just like how we do it in volume, we're doing it in area. And only difference is obviously you don't square it, you don't multiply it by pi. The limits also that you take are the y values, okay? And you get this answer. Once again, you can use your calculator to check. But also remember that whenever there's a question like this, there will always be a way to do it the way that you normally do it. And that is, you can find out the area of the rectangle here, and then you can find out the area of under the curve within the limits. Okay, you'll have to first figure these out. You'll have to plug in y as 3 to find out x. Okay, and then you can do it like that, upper minus lower. Okay, upper वाला जो shape है उसका area निकाल लो, और फिर जो lower वाले के नीचे का area वो निकाल लो, minus कर लो. I think I've done it using an alternative method also, or maybe I haven't. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyway, so once again, find the area of the shaded region, find the relevant limits. The limits are 0 and a. You have to find out the value of a first. Use that, integrate within the limits, get the answer. Simple. Here also, if you want to find out the area of the shaded region, upper means integrating the curve within the limits half in a minus lower. Now for lower, you can always integrate the line, but if you've watched my videos, you know I always prefer turning it into a polygon, could be a triangle, could be a trapezium, and subtracting that area. ठीक है, लेकिन फिर भी whatever method that you use your calculator to check your answer, integrate the equation of the line within the limits using your calculator to see whether whatever method you use is giving you the correct answer or not. Okay, so here for example, area under the curve minus the area of triangle / area under the line. So irrespective of how you do it, you get the same answer. ठीक है, so this is if you do it by a triangle, and I think I've done this here using area under the line. So irrespective, you get the same answer. Here also the exact same way, upper minus lower. Now the lower is basically area under the line within the limits 3 or 7, or it's a trapezium. So if I were you, I would prefer trapezium, okay? But it all depends on the information. The question setup kis tarah ka hua hai. If let's say you worked out all the relevant values and it's easy for you to find out the area of trapezium, go ahead and find out the area of trapezium, okay? Achha, then there is volume. Achha, volume, if let's say you're rotating about the x-axis, you make y the subject if it's not already, you square y, you integrate y square within the limits a and b, and you multiply by pi. ठीक है, इसमें भी हम exactly upper or minus lower वाला concept use करते हैं if let's say the volume is between two curves or something like that. Now, although this is not something that's tested, I haven't seen a question, but remember, if it's not 360 degrees, if it's 180 degrees, who knows, you guys may be the first time where a question like this comes, so don't forget to divide it by 2. If it's 90 degrees, don't forget to divide by 2, because 180 degree means that we're not doing a full 360 degree rotation, it's only half. Okay, so the area will be half. If it's 90 degrees, that means it's a quarter, just like it's a quarter circle, so the total area is quarter of a circle. So that's what you do. Okay, but I've written it, it's not something that's tested too often, so just to be on the safe side. So you're rotating the shaded region 360 degrees around the x-axis, so make y the subject, square it, integrate it within the limits. Once again, use your calculator to check your answer, multiply by pi, this is what you get. If it's about the y-axis, you make x the subject, you square the answer of step 1, you integrate x squared with respect to y within the limits c and d. C and d are basically your limits on the y-axis. Okay, and then you multiply the final answer by pi. So for example, here you integrate the curve within the limits 2, and whatever this value is 1. Okay, which means you make x the subject, it is already the subject, so you don't have to worry about it. So you square x. Acha, here, my suggestion to you would be, because inside it's not a linear function, so expand the bracket before you integrate. Okay? Because inside is not a linear function, so expand the bracket and then integrate it. If, however, let's say this was 8y minus 2, then you could integrate using power rule. Meaning you add 1 to the power, you divide by the new power, multiply by 8. You could have done it like that. Okay? And then in the end, don't forget to multiply it by pi. Here also, you're rotating, I think, about the y-axis, so make x the subject. ठीक है, अक्सर सवाल आपको ना किसी पार्ट में करवा ही लेगा. हाँ देखो, okay, it's setting you up basically for the final part. And अच्छा, here it's asking to find out the area of the shaded region. Okay, so this is that question where it's asking to find out the area of the shaded region, and the area is bounded by the y-axis. So I said it's not tested very often, but here it is. I probably forgot about this. So you will integrate the equation of the curve with respect to y using the y values as the limits. How will you find out this limit? You will plug in 0 in place of x. Let's do it right now. So ये 2 आ जाएगा. This we can see is 1. So you'll integrate x. You'll integrate this with respect to y within the limits 1 and 2. And you will have the area of the shaded region. ठीक हो गया? अच्छा, इसकी volume कैसे निकालेंगे? What is it rotated about? It's rotated about the y-axis. So first find out the volume that's generated by the curve. Okay, just like you would find area, you do the same for volume. Then you find out the volume generated by the line, and then you subtract. Okay, volume generated by the curve minus line. So for curve, you square it. You make y the, if it's about the y-axis, you make x the subject, you square it, you integrate it, you apply the limits, and you multiply it by pi. You do the same for line. You subtract the 2 and you get the answer. Okay, indefinite integral, also very simple. I see a lot of people losing their mind over it. So you integrate the way that you do it. Okay, but when you plug in the limits, so because x will always be in the denominator, and when you plug in infinity, so what happens here? As the denominator approaches infinity, the entire fraction approaches 0. Okay, so I discussed this in detail in one of the integration streams. I think it was part 1 or part 2, I don't know. But basically, when you plug in infinity as your limit, so the denominator has infinity, just like how we did in functions. So when the denominator approaches infinity, the entire function approaches 0. Okay, so that means the value with the upper limit plugged in becomes 0, minus the lower limit. So this is what you're left with. Simple as that. Here also, you integrate the way that you would do it normally. You plug in the limits, infinity plug in karoge, so denominator jo hai wo infinity ho jayega. That means it's as good as 0. This, however, remains as it is, and the answer is 2/3. And that, fellas, is the end. Now I'll enable the chat so you guys can let some steam out. And we are done. हाँ जी सर मेंसुरेशन के नोट्स एंड कितने टाइप शेप्स आते हैं बेटा ओ लेवल के अपने नोट्स खोल लो उसमें देख लेना ठीक है So if you're rotating about x-axis and y is already squared, no, then if it's already squared, then no need to square it again, obviously. Channing, good luck. Sir, still live? Yep, I'm still live. Channing, thank you. Now, please don't pull an all-nighter. Khuda ke waste, get a good night's sleep. Wake up early if you have to study, but get a good night's sleep. Get like 5, 6. Get up for Fajr if you can, obviously, and then after that, I would suggest you sleep again, then get up at 9, 10, and then you can study. Okay, but do some light work, okay? So whatever heavy work was to be done, we've done it now. Tomorrow onwards, just do some light work. Okay? That's what I want to say. Achha. So I'll stop here. I'll see you guys, inshallah, in the next stream for S1 and M1. And for P3 also. So take care. Remember, I understand paper आपका PM के time पे है, but नमाज ना छोड़िएगा. Find a masjid close to your venue and pray there. अच्छा, what's that? Y equals to 1 को कैसे integrate करेंगे? बेटा 1 को square करोगे तो 1 ही रहेगा, 1 को integrate करोगे तो वो x हो जाएगा. Look at the streams that I've done of integration, volume under the curve, volume generated by the curve. तो समझ आ जाएगा आपको. अच्छा मसरूर, आप ये बार बार बोल रहे हो ax plus b the whole thing square plus c form quadratics. Please just do one question. बेटा इसके अभी आप मेरे क्वाड्रेटिक्स के नोट्स खोलो, उसमें मैंने इस तरह का क्वेश्चन सॉल्व किया हुआ है, ठीक है. आई सॉल्व अ क्वेश्चन लाइक दिस, जस्ट यूज आइडेंटिटीज इफ यू हैव टू, एंड दैट्स इट. So all at once, can we find area under the curved line? What do you mean? How will you do that at once? So should we? No, please do not do a past paper. Okay, please don't do a past paper. जी बेटा मैंने सारे टॉपिक्स करा दिए, बाइनोमियल भी करा दिया, वो भी करा दिया. मे बी अगर आप में से किसी को टाइम मिले तो लेटर ऑन यू कैन पुट सम टाइम स्टैम्प्स, दैट वुड बी ग्रेट, और आई विल टेल माई टीम टू डू इट. But anyway, so I will stop here. I'll see you guys inshallah. Tomorrow I'll post a video. I've posted a good luck video. Make sure to watch it. इसमें कुछ tips and tricks भी हैं for you guys. That's important. And I'll post a video asking you guys how your exam goes. Do let me know how it goes. And the video that I've posted, everything that I want to say to you guys right now, I've covered in that video. So make sure to watch that video. Mosque near ballroom. बेटा मैं कोई आपका where is ballroom? I don't know where ballroom is. Google कर लो ना यार. ठीक है. Put some effort. सवाब मिलेगा. ठीक है. So I don't know where ballroom is. Google कर लें. चलें. So that's enough. See you guys. Take care everyone. Allah Hafiz.